Imagine discovering a message from an ancient civilization, a message that has survived for thousands of years, yet no one on Earth can read it. The symbols are real. The artifacts are real. The people who created them once built cities traded across continents and left behind clues everywhere. But their greatest secret remains locked inside a code that has defeated generations of historians, archaeologists, cryptographers, and AI systems alike. Tonight we're diving into one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries, the ancient code nobody has broken. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with fellow history lovers. Now let's uncover the mystery hidden in plain sight. The first thing that survives is not a voice, it is a mark. A small deliberate wound pressed into clay, cut into stone, painted onto a surface that has long since lost its maker. The hand is gone. The language around it is gone. The room where it was made has fallen, burned, flooded, or been carried away grain by the wind. Yet the sign remains stubborn and silent, as if time has removed everything except the question it was meant to answer. It waits in a museum drawer on a shattered tablet, on the face of a seal, or on a fragment lifted carefully from the earth by someone who understands at once that the object is not ordinary. It is not decoration alone. It is not random damage. It is a message or something close to one, and that is what makes it so haunting. There are ancient codes that can be admired even when they cannot be read. Their signs are clear enough to feel intentional, repeated enough to suggest order, and strange enough to resist easy explanation. They seem to stand at the border between human thought and human loss. A row of symbols may have once recorded a name, a shipment, a prayer, a boundary, a title, a curse, or a law. It may have belonged to a palace, a shrine, a workshop, a marketplace, or a tomb. What survives in the record suggests intelligence, habit, and purpose, but the precise meaning remains just out of reach. Scholars still debate whether certain undeciphered scripts are full writing systems, specialized administrative marks, ritual signs, or something that lives uneasily between those categories. The mystery begins in that uncomfortable space. A broken object appears under the light, and the modern observer can see that the ancient maker wanted the marks to last. The strokes are not casual. They sit in rows or panels. They return in similar forms. Some are simple lines, some are curves, boxes, ladders, fish-like shapes, human figures, plants, vessels, knots, circles, or forms that refuse any familiar name. The eye searches for rhythm. It notices one sign appearing again and again, another placed only at the end of a sequence, another paired with a neighbour, as if the two belong together. Meaning feels close, almost too close. Then it vanishes. This is the strange cruelty of an ancient code nobody has broken. It does not hide because it is invisible. It hides in plain sight. The symbols are often right there, photographed, copied, measured, catalogued, and compared. Specialists may know the shape of every line and the depth of every cut. They may know the age of the layer where the object was found, the mineral content of the clay, the trade routes that carried the stone, the settlement plan around the discovery, and the burial customs of the people who left it behind. Yet the signs themselves remain mute. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for the silence. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the story of an unread code is not only about symbols, it is about the fragile bridge between a living world and the ruins it leaves behind. Imagine a settlement near a river, not in the glow of myth, but in the practical light of daily life. There is dust in the doorways, smoke above low roofs, animals moving between walls, baskets carried from one place to another, and people who understand their world through work, memory, obligation, and fear. Someone keeps account of grain. Someone marks ownership. Someone seals a jar. Someone records an offering, a debt, a lineage, or a name that matters, because names have power in a world where authority must be remembered. The signs may not be meant for everyone. Perhaps only a few trained hands know how to make them correctly. Perhaps they are not read aloud in streets but handled in storerooms, temples, or offices. Perhaps they belong to a narrow class of specialists whose skill gives them quiet control over goods, rituals, and decisions. Then the world changes. The river shifts. A drought lingers. Trade weakens. A ruling house falls. A new group arrives. A palace burns. A temple is abandoned. Children grow up speaking differently from their grandparents. The people who learn the code die without passing it on, or they pass it on for a few generations until the reason to use it fades. These signs remain on objects, but the living memory around them thins. At first, later, people may still recognize that the marks are old and important. Then they may treat them as sacred, decorative, dangerous, or simply strange. Centuries pass. The code becomes a relic. A message becomes a surface. A system once held in human minds becomes a pattern without a speaker. That is why an undeciphered code feels different from an ordinary ruin. A collapsed wall tells of labor, shelter, and decay. A pot tells of food storage and craft. A weapon tells of violence or protection, but a written or semi-written sign promises access to thought itself. It implies that someone meant to transfer information across space or time. The frustration is that the transfer stopped halfway. The object made it across the centuries, the meaning did not. The hand reached forward, but the voice failed to arrive. Some ancient codes are famous because they sit at the center of entire vanished worlds. Others are obscure, known only from a handful of fragments that specialists debate with care and caution. The public often imagines a single dramatic moment of decipherment, a hidden key suddenly turning in a lock. Sometimes history has offered such moments. The decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphs and Mesopotamian cuneiform transformed mute monuments into historical archives. It revealed kings, taxes, prayers, wars, jokes, lists, astronomical observations, diplomatic letters, and ordinary worries preserved by accident. Yet those successes also sharpen the pain of the scripts that remain unread. They show what might be waiting behind the silence. The problem is that a code cannot be broken by desire. It needs evidence. It needs repeated examples, secure archaeological context, and ideally a bilingual or multilingual text that links the unknown signs to a known language. It needs enough material to separate pattern from coincidence. It needs scholars willing to reject attractive guesses when the evidence will not hold them. Without those things, signs can become mirrors. People see what they hope to see, lost wisdom, secret maps vanished. Religion's proof of impossible voyages or connections between cultures that never met. Such theories can be seductive, but they often begin by treating resemblance as proof. Mainstream research moves more slowly. It asks whether the signs behave like language, whether sequences repeat in meaningful ways, whether the direction of writing can be established, whether names might be identified, and whether the surrounding archaeology supports the proposed reading. Even then, certainty may remain distant. A sign shaped like an animal may not mean that animal. A repeated symbol may not be a word. A short inscription may be too brief to reveal grammar. A beautiful object may be ceremonial rather than administrative. A set of marks may belong to a counting system, a clan emblem, a maker's mark, a religious formula, or a script whose language is no longer known. Scholars still debate these boundaries because ancient communication did not always fit modern categories. The line between art symbol, record, and writing is not a clean border. It is a long shore where many things wash together. The ancient code nobody has broken therefore stands at the beginning of a larger story, how human beings learn to make thought durable, how societies trusted marks to carry memory, and how easily that memory could break. The surviving symbols are not merely puzzles for clever minds. They are traces of a vanished agreement. Once a community knew what these marks did. A certain shape placed beside another shape changed something in the world. It confirmed ownership, invoked a power, counted an offering, named a person, or closed a transaction. The meaning did not live in the object alone. It lived in shared practice, in training, in institutions, in spoken language, in people who understood why the mark mattered. When those people disappear, the code becomes a locked room with no door visible from the outside. Modern researchers stand before it with cameras, microscopes, databases, excavation reports, and patience. They can map the walls, they can measure the stones, they can sometimes hear faint echoes through the cracks, but the room itself remains closed. That is where the story must begin, not with the fantasy of instant revelation, but with the deeper mystery of how a human message survives, long after the world that created it has gone silent. Long before a sign becomes a sentence, it begins as a decision to remember something outside the body. That decision may look small from a distance, almost humble. A notch on bone, a mark on clay, a token shaped by hand and stored in a container, a seal pressed over wet mud so that a jar cannot be opened without breaking the proof of control. These things do not yet speak in the way a later inscription speaks, but they belong to the same long human movement toward durable memory. They show a world in which people no longer trust the mind alone to hold every debt, every measure, every promise, every boundary, and every obligation. The earliest marks are often difficult to classify because human beings make marks for many reasons. Some count, some identify, some decorate, some protect. Some may carry meanings that are social or ritual rather than linguistic. A repeated line might be a tally, but it might also be a pattern. A carved shape might represent a thing in the world, but it might also mark membership, ownership, status, or memory. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate where marking ends and writing begins. Yet there is no doubt that before full writing systems appear, communities across the ancient world already understand that a visible sign can hold power. In small mobile groups, memory can live in people, places, scars, paths, songs, and repeated habits. Knowledge travels through bodies and voices. A hunter knows the valley because feet have crossed it many times. A family remembers a burial because the place is visited and spoken of. A toolmaker recognizes another hand's skill from the angle of a flake. Such worlds are rich in memory, but their memory is carried by living networks. When settlements grow larger, when goods accumulate, when seasons of planting and harvest become tied to stores, labor, and redistribution, the pressure changes. Memory must stretch farther. It must cross households, generations, and institutions. It must survive disputes. It must become harder to deny. This is one of the quiet revolutions behind early signs. They are not simply inventions of clever scribes. They arise from social tension. Someone owes something. Someone controls something. Someone gives, takes measures, stores, or promises. Clay tokens in the ancient Near East, for example, are often understood as part of a long development in accounting, before and alongside early writing. Their shapes may have represented quantities or kinds of goods, though the exact relationship between token systems and later scripts remains debated. What matters for this story is the principle. A small object can stand for something absent. A mark can make an invisible obligation visible. In villages and early towns, this changes daily life in ways that may not appear dramatic at first. Grain enters a storehouse. Oil is poured into jars. Animals are counted. A worker receives rations, a household delivers part of its harvest. A temple or elite household manages goods beyond what one person can hold in memory. The sign does not merely describe the event, it helps organize the event. It turns human relationships into something that can be checked, carried sealed and challenged. A mark becomes a tool of trust, but also a tool of control. Seals are especially revealing because they sit between art identity and administration. A seal can bear an image, a name, a symbol, or a repeated design. Pressed into wet clay, it creates a small surface of authority. It says that a container door bundle or document has passed through a recognized hand. If the seal is broken, something has changed. Even without reading, people can understand the seriousness of that break. In this way, a sign can function before it is openly linguistic. It can enforce a social agreement. It can carry the presence of someone who is not there. There is a lesser-known strangeness in this early world of signs. Many of the objects that help create administrative order are also fragile. Clay can harden in fire and survive for millennia, but many signs were likely made on materials that disappeared. Wood, leather, cloth, bark, wax, and fibre rarely survive in ordinary archaeological conditions. A culture may have used marks far more widely than the surviving record suggests, yet time preserves only a narrow accidental selection. The ancient code that reaches modern eyes may be the durable edge of a much larger lost practice. What survives in the record suggests habits of marking, but not necessarily the full environment in which those marks once made sense. This matters because the modern imagination often treats ancient writing as a sudden flash of genius, as if one day a society is silent and the next day it speaks in rows of signs. The archaeological reality is slower and more uneven. Systems of marking grow out of counting, labeling, sealing ownership, ritual display, and memory. They borrow from images already familiar to the community. They change as institutions change. Some become full script capable of recording language in detail. Others remain limited systems for special purposes. Others fade before reaching a form that later scholars can confidently interpret. The earlier signs also do not appear in a vacuum. They emerge in landscapes full of pressure. Rivers flood and withdraw. Crops succeed or fail. Herds move. Traders arrive carrying shells, metals, stones, pigments, and stories from places far away. Leaders and ritual specialists begin to gather surplus labor and loyalty. Burial customs become more elaborate in some places. Buildings grow larger. People start living close enough that organization becomes both necessary and dangerous. A symbol can help manage abundance, but it can also hide inequality behind procedure. A record can stabilize a community, but it can also make obligation permanent. This is where the path toward hidden language begins. A sign that once records a jar of grain may become part of a broader system. Repetition encourages standardization. Standardization creates training. Training creates specialists. Specialists create distance between those who make the marks and those who merely obey their consequences. The mark, at first a practical aid, begins to gather authority. It becomes something that can outlast a conversation. It can be stored in an archive, carried to another settlement, or displayed in a ritual space. It can represent not only things but decisions. Yet the closer these early signs come to writing, the more difficult they become for later scholars. A tally is simple only when the counted thing is known. A seal is meaningful only when the institution behind it is understood. A symbol repeated on objects may be obvious to the people who used it, and nearly impenetrable to everyone else. An unknown sign system may look like a code because the key has vanished, but in its own time it may have been perfectly ordinary, as plain as a receipt, a label, or a name tag. The mystery is born not from ancient secrecy alone, but from the collapse of context. Across different regions, the movement from mark to message takes many forms. In some places, pictorial signs slowly narrow into conventional symbols. In others, administrative needs encourage abstract marks. In others, symbols remain tied to ritual or elite display. No single path explains every case. Scholars still debate how much early writing grows from economic management, how much from religious practice, and how much from political power. The safest answer is that these forces often overlap. A temple can be an economic center. A ruler can claim sacred authority. A storehouse can be both a practical building and a symbol of control. A sign can count grain and at the same time reinforce the world that decides who receives it. The ancient code nobody has broken belongs somewhere along this deep human continuum. It may be the descendant of practical marks. It may be a specialized script used by a narrow group. It may preserve an early experiment in making language visible. It may come from a society whose spoken words vanished without leaving descendants. Whatever its exact nature, it rests on a foundation built over thousands of years when humans learned that a mark could do more than decorate a surface. It could hold memory, it could carry power, it could speak for the absent. And once a community learns that the world changes permanently, a mark can travel farther than a voice, it can wait longer than a witness, it can survive the death of its maker and the collapse of the room where it was made. But it also depends on a living chain of understanding. If that chain breaks, the same mark that once made life clearer becomes a small island of silence. It remains visible, precise, and almost intimate, while the meaning beneath it sinks away. The first signs are therefore not merely the beginning of communication across time. They are also the beginning of a new kind of loss. There is a moment in the life of a sign when it stops being only a mark of memory and begins to carry language more directly. That moment is rarely clean. It does not arrive like a gate opening all at once. It happens unevenly through repetition, pressure, usefulness, and habit. A symbol that once points to a thing begins to point to a sound, a name, an office, an action, or an idea that cannot be drawn. A picture of an object becomes less like the object and more like a conventional sign. The hand learns speed, the eye learns expectation. The community learns that certain marks arranged in certain ways can stand for speech authority and knowledge. Hidden language is born not because people suddenly desire mystery, but because systems of communication become powerful enough that not everyone can use them. In early societies, writing is often practical before it is poetic. It enters the world through inventories, labels, deliveries, offerings, land boundaries, names, titles, and accounts. It begins near the places where goods move and decisions concentrate. The earlier scribes do not necessarily think of themselves as guardians of literature. They are often administrators of order, people trained to keep track of what others produce or store or dedicate. Yet from that practical world grows something far larger. Once signs can preserve spoken language, they can preserve commands, prayers, genealogies, laws, treaties, myths, and royal claims. A ruler's reach extends beyond the sound of his voice. A temple's memory becomes harder to dispute. A merchant's transaction can survive the witnesses who saw it made. This is where an ancient code begins to feel less like a puzzle and more like a structure of power. A system of signs is never neutral for very long. Someone learns it. Someone controls it. Someone decides which forms are correct and which are meaningless. The ability to write and read may be limited by training class, occupation, gender, institution, or geography. Many people in a society may live under the consequences of written marks without being able to produce or interpret them. A tablet, seal, label, or inscription can shape their lives while remaining closed to them. What looks to modern eyes like a mysterious code may have looked to most ancient eyes much the same important official, possibly sacred and not entirely theirs. The birth of hidden language therefore has two sides. On one side, it is one of humanity's most extraordinary achievements. It allows memory to survive storms, distance, death, and political change. It makes complex administration possible. It gives later generations access to thoughts that would otherwise have disappeared. On the other side, writing can create a new boundary inside a community. Those who understand the marks occupy a different position from those who do not. The signs become a gate. They may open archive storerooms, rituals, contracts, and histories, but only for people taught to pass through. In many ancient worlds, that teaching is not casual. It requires time, discipline, and correction. A child or apprentice must learn the shapes, the order, the tools, the materials, the direction of writing, the meanings that shift, depending on context and the habits of the institution that uses the script. Some systems are demanding because they include hundreds of signs. Others are difficult because they preserve older forms long after everyday speech changes. Some use a mixture of sound signs, word signs, determinatives, numbers and symbols with specialized functions. To someone inside the tradition, this may be normal. To someone outside it, the same system appears almost deliberately concealed. Yet secrecy is not always the point. Complexity can arise from history. A script may keep old conventions because scribes respect tradition, or because institutions resist change. A sign may continue to be written long after its original shape is forgotten. A symbol may have several values because it has passed through different stages of use. Practical systems can become conservative, layered, and difficult without anyone designing them as a secret code. Scholars still debate in many cases whether an unread sign system was intentionally restricted, merely specialized, or simply lost before enough evidence survived to explain it. The most haunting undeciphered codes sit at the intersection of these possibilities. They look orderly. They seem connected to organized life. They may appear on seals, tablets, vessels, plaques, or monumental surfaces. Their repetition suggests convention. Their placement suggests purpose. Their survival suggests importance. But the language beneath them is unknown. The community that used them is only partly reconstructed, and the training that once made them readable has vanished. The signs may not be encrypted in the modern sense. They may not be meant to hide meaning from enemies. They are hidden because the world that made them readable no longer exists. This difference matters. A modern code is often designed with concealment in mind. It assumes an unauthorized reader and builds a barrier. An ancient unread script may be different. It may have been completely open to those who belong to the right household office, temple workshop, or ruling court. It may have been seen every day by people who understood it as routine. The mystery is created later by the loss of the language, the collapse of institutions, and the destruction of archives. Time becomes the codemaker. Ruin becomes the cipher. The transition from practical marking to language also creates new kinds of evidence for archaeologists. Written signs can reveal contact between regions, changes in administration, borrowed symbols, shifts in economy, and the rise of elite display. A script may appear suddenly in one layer and spread through trade or conquest. It may be adapted from another system, reshaped to fit a different language, or imitated without full understanding. It may shrink, flourish, or disappear, depending on whether the social world that supports it remains alive. No script is only a set of signs. It is a living behavior anchored in people, tools, places, and needs. That is why decipherment requires more than matching symbols to sounds. It requires a reconstruction of life around a script. The surface asks one question, but the ground asks many others. Where are the inscriptions found? Are they clustered in palaces, houses, tombs, workshops, ports, or sanctuaries? Do they appear on portable objects or fixed monuments? Are the texts long or short? Are the signs carefully made or quickly scratched? Do they accompany images of rulers, animals, offerings, ships, weapons, crops, or ritual scenes? Are they repeated across a wide region or confined to a small landscape? Each answer narrows the possibilities, though the evidence often refuses to narrow them enough. A short inscription on a seal may identify a person, but it may also name an office, a deity, a clan, a workshop, or a commodity. A sign on pottery may mark ownership, contents, capacity, destination maker, or ritual purpose. A repeated formula on stone may be a prayer, a title, a dedication, or a boundary marker. Without a known language or a parallel text, certainty remains fragile. The same sign can invite several readings, and every reading must survive the pressure of the whole archaeological picture. No single clever comparison can unlock a system by itself. Still, even unread signs tell part of their story. They show that their makers lived in a world where communication had become formal enough to require standard forms. They suggest training repetition and shared rules. They reveal that certain messages mattered enough to be made durable. They show that the society had problems worth recording and authorities worth naming. The code may remain unread, but its existence is evidence of organization. It points to human beings thinking beyond the immediate moment, building systems to manage absence, distance, and time. The deeper mystery is that the same invention that preserves memory can also preserve inequality, secrecy, and silence. A sign can include, but it can also exclude. It can make a king permanent and a labourer invisible. It can record offerings to a god while leaving ordinary hunger unwritten. It can preserve a title, but not a voice. What survives in the record suggests the priorities of those who controlled the medium, not the full life of everyone who lived beneath it. Even when a code is deciphered, it may speak most clearly for institutions, not for the quiet majority. The ancient code nobody has broken therefore begins to take shape as more than an intellectual challenge. It is a fragment of a social world. It was made by hands trained within a system. It was read by eyes that knew where to look. It belonged to a community that gave signs their force. When that community vanished or changed beyond recognition, the mark stayed behind like locked doors arranged along a ruined street. Each door promises an interior. Each one suggests rooms of information, memory, ceremony, and control. Yet the key is not only a phonetic value or a dictionary. The key is the vanished relationship between mark, language, institution, and life, and so the signs remain at the edge of meaning. They show humanity crossing a threshold, learning to bind speech to matter, learning to send thought beyond the body. But they also show how fragile that binding can be. A script may look permanent on clay or stone, yet its meaning depends on something far softer. Living minds, repeated teaching, shared language, and a world stable enough to keep them together. Once those disappear, the birth of hidden language becomes the beginning of an ancient silence that no modern eye can easily break. The people who understand a script are often less visible than the script itself. Their work remains in neat rows, repeated signs, measured spacing, and practiced cuts, but their names may never survive. They sit behind the ancient code like figures glimpsed through smoke-trained hands, careful eyes, patient memories and habits learned so deeply that the movement of the tool becomes almost automatic. In a living society, they are not mysterious. They are workers of knowledge, keepers of accounts, servants of palaces, temples, courts, workshops, ports, or estates. They know where a sign begins and ends. They know which mark is acceptable and which one betrays an untrained hand. They know what can be abbreviated, what must be written fully, what formulas must be repeated, and what names require special care. When they disappear, the code does not vanish at once. It remains on objects and walls, but the human machinery that made it meaningful breaks apart. This is one of the most important truths about ancient writing scripts. Do not read themselves. They survive only as long as communities teach them. A child may grow up hearing a language in the street, but reading a formal script can require years of instruction. The signs may preserve old pronunciations, sacred conventions, administrative formulas, or specialized vocabulary that ordinary speech no longer carries. Even in a society where many people recognize a few marks, true literacy may remain narrow. A scribe belongs to a chain. Someone taught the forms to a teacher who taught them to an apprentice, who copied models, memorized lists, practiced on broken pieces, learned mistakes by correction, and eventually entered the working world where signs had consequences. The code lives in that chain as much as it lives on claystone, bone, or metal. The collapse of that chain can happen quietly. It does not always require a dramatic invasion or a burning city, though those things can hasten the loss. Sometimes an administrative system changes and the old script becomes inconvenient. A new ruling group brings another language, another set of scribes, another writing tradition. A religious institution loses wealth and can no longer support trained specialists. Trade routes shift, and the merchants who need certain marks stop using them. A palace archive is destroyed and the school attached to it never returns. A population disperses after drought, famine, disease, conflict, or political failure. Children learn the speech of new neighbors and no longer inherit the technical language of their grandparents. Within a few generations, signs that once directed labor and wealth can become old marks with no living reader. There is a dry, almost bureaucratic tragedy in this. The loss of a script may not look like the end of knowledge while it is happening. It may look like reform, adaptation, survival, or simple neglect. A clerk uses a more familiar script because the new administrators prefer it. A ritual specialist stops copying old formulas because offerings no longer pass through the same sanctuary. A family keeps an heirloom seal but no longer understands the full meaning of its inscription. A potter copies a prestigious mark because it seems ancient and authoritative, even as its original value fades. The evidence remains incomplete, but archaeology repeatedly shows that cultural memory can become uneven long before a culture disappears entirely. People can live among ruins, reuse stones, imitate old designs, and preserve customs without understanding every sign left by their ancestors. This is why the vanished scribe matters so much. To break an ancient code, modern scholars need not only signs, but signs made within a living system of use. Long text help because they preserve patterns. Repetition helps because it reveals formulas. Archives help because they show how documents relate to one another. Bilingual inscriptions help most of all because they connect unknown signs with known language. But if a script dies before it produces abundant records, or if the records were made mostly on perishable materials, or if war and decay destroy the places where scribes worked, later researchers face a cruel imbalance. They may have enough symbols to suspect writing, but not enough to prove how it functions. They may see the smoke of a vanished school without finding the school itself. Ancient scribes often work at the center of power, though not always at the top of it. Their status can vary widely. Some may be humble record keepers tied to daily accounts and repetitive tasks. Others may serve courts, temples, or elite households and gain influence because they manage what others cannot easily verify. They may know legal formulas, ritual calendars, genealogies, taxes, property records, diplomatic conventions, or sacred lists. they may become necessary to rulers who want authority to last beyond a spoken order. They may also become vulnerable when authority changes. A new regime may preserve skilled scribes for practical reasons, but it may also replace them if their knowledge is too closely tied to the old order. In a stable world, scribes help make time orderly. They turn harvests into records, offerings into inventories, labor into lists, boundaries into statements, and rulers into names that appear again and again on durable surfaces. They reduce the confusion of life into marks that can be stored, counted, and retrieved. Yet the same precision that makes their work useful can make it fragile. A scribal tradition depends on conventions that outsiders may not share. A sign may be obvious only because a school teaches it beside dozens of others. A title may be recognized because everyone in the administrative world knows the office behind it. A formula may be understood because it appears in rituals repeated each year. Remove the school, the office, the ritual, and the formula becomes a pattern without an anchor. The disappearance of scribes also reminds us that writing is not simply technology. It is labor. It takes time to prepare materials, sharpen tools, shape tablets, smooth surfaces, mix pigments, cut lines, seal containers, store documents, and train hands to repeat forms with accuracy. A society under stress may abandon complex traditions because survival demands faster solutions. If food becomes uncertain, if settlements shrink, if authority fragments, if long-distance exchange breaks down, the support system around writing can weaken. People may still speak, remember, sing, trade, worship, and govern, but the specialized habits that sustain a script may no longer be worth the effort. What survives in the ground can make this process seem sudden, yet in lived experience it may have been a gradual narrowing of use. There are also cases where writing does not disappear because people forget how to mark things, but because they choose different marks. A script can be replaced by another that offers practical advantages. It may be easier to learn, better suited to a new language associated with a powerful neighbor, or required by a conquering administration. When this happens, the older script may linger in ceremonial use, on seals, monuments, heirlooms, or conservative religious objects. It may gain an aura of antiquity even as fewer people can read it. Eventually, the last specialists die. The older signs remain prestigious but opaque. The code has crossed from literacy into memory, then from memory into mystery. This movement can be difficult to trace because the final generation of readers rarely announces itself. There is usually no surviving tablet that says the knowledge is ending. Instead, archaeologists see indirect signs, fewer inscriptions, poorer, copying, mixed forms, unusual spellings, changes in material, or sudden replacement by another system. Even these clues are debated. A decline in inscriptions may reflect excavation bias, preservation conditions, economic change, or a shift to materials that did not survive. No single explanation fully accounts for every silent script. The end of scribal knowledge is often reconstructed from fragments, absences, and cautious inference. The human cost of that ending is easy to underestimate. When a script dies, more than words disappear. Administrative memory becomes inaccessible, local names may vanish, myths may lose their older forms, laws, contracts, offerings, ownership, diplomacy, and genealogies may survive only as objects without voice. Later cultures may build new identities over the same landscape, unaware of what the buried signs once recorded. A city can remain inhabited while one layer of its memory becomes unreadable beneath another. A people may not vanish biologically, but their old system of meaning can vanish almost completely. This is one of the reasons undeciphered codes feel so intimate. They're not merely technical failures. They are evidence that someone once stood at the end of a long chain of teaching and wrote for a world that still understood. That person may have believed the mark was secure. Clay hardens, stone endures, metal lasts. A seal impression can outlive the body that pressed it, yet the scribe's confidence rests on a fragile assumption that the future will contain readers. History often refuses that promise. The last scribe of a vanished script may never have known they were the last. They may have copied a routine account, sealed a jar marked a dedication, or scratched a name into a surface with no sense of finality. The day may have been ordinary. The light may have fallen across a work table. Dust may have gathered in the corner of a room. Outside animals may have moved through a courtyard, and someone may have called for water or grain or help with a door. The mark was made because life required it. Then life moved on, and the chain broke somewhere beyond the scribe's sight. What remains is the strange afterlife of their skill. Modern researchers can sometimes identify the difference between trained and untrained hands. They can see confidence in the line regularity and the spacing, the economy of a practice stroke. They can tell when a sign belongs to a system rather than to accident. But they cannot ask the maker what was meant. They cannot recover the lessons whispered over practice tablets or the corrections given by an impatient teacher. The script survives as a skeleton without the body of instruction that animated it, and so the vanished scribes stand at the center of the ancient code nobody has broken. Their absence is the real lock. The symbols may be copied with perfect accuracy, enlarged on screens, compared across databases, and examined under new light, but the social world that once made them readable is gone. The code is not silent because its makers were unintelligent, or because the marks are meaningless. It is silent because meaning depends on continuity, and continuity is one of the most breakable things civilizations possess. The code does not reach the present as an idea alone, it arrives through matter. Claystone, bone, metal, shell, ivory, wood when the earth is unusually kind, and countless vanished surfaces when it is not. Every ancient sign is also an object, and every object has suffered a journey. It has been buried, burned, broken, reused, washed into another layer, handled by later hands, sold, stolen, catalogued, forgotten, rediscovered or studied under lights its maker could never have imagined. Before anyone can ask what a symbol means, someone must first ask what has happened to the surface that carries it. This is why the physical life of an undeciphered code matters so much. A script carved into stone behaves differently from a script written on bark or cloth. A seal impression on clay preserves one moment of pressure, one brief contact between engraved object and wet surface. A painted sign on a wall may fade until only a ghost of pigment remains. A mark scratched into bone may be confused with wear, decoration, tallying, or butchery unless its pattern is clear. A copper tablet may corrode. A gold object may survive brilliantly, but lose its archaeological context if removed from the ground without proper recording. The material does not merely carry the message, it shapes the message that survives. Clay is one of history's great accidental allies. In daily use, a clay tablet may be ordinary, cheap, and practical. It can be shaped, written on, dried, stored, and discarded. If fired deliberately or baked accidentally during destruction, it can endure for thousands of years. This is one reason some ancient Near Eastern archives survive in astonishing numbers, while other societies of similar complexity remain far quieter. The difference is not always that one culture wrote more than another. Sometimes one culture wrote on a material that survived, while another wrote on something time consumed almost completely. The evidence remains incomplete because preservation is never fair. Stone offers a different kind of survival. It is durable, public, and slow. To cut signs into stone is to invest labour in permanence. Such inscriptions often belong to authority, ritual, commemoration boundaries, tombs, or display. They are meant to be seen, though not always by everyone in the same way. A stone inscription may face a road, a courtyard, a temple wall, a cliff, or the chamber of the dead. It may declare power, mark sacred space, preserve a name, or fix memory to landscape. Yet stone has its own losses. Weather softens edges, earthquakes break panels. Later builders reuse blocks in walls, drains thresholds or foundations. A text once placed to command attention can end up upside down in a medieval doorway or buried beneath a floor where nobody can read it. Bone and ivory carry another intimacy. They are organic, close to the body, shaped by life before they become surfaces for signs. Marks on bone can be deeply personal, ritual, practical, or decorative. They can preserve counting systems, ownership marks, gaming pieces, divination tools, labels, or symbols whose function remains debated. But bone is also vulnerable to decay, soil chemistry, gnawing, burning, and handling. When it survives, it often does so in fragments. A sequence may be cut off at the broken edge, leaving scholars unsure whether they are seeing the beginning, middle, or end of a message. A few marks may look deliberate but remain too few to interpret. What survives in the record suggests intention, but intention alone does not yield language. Metal can seem more reliable, but it brings its own distortions. Bronze, copper, lead, silver, and gold all enter different worlds of use and value. A metal inscription may be made to endure, but metal is worth melting. Across history, objects carrying signs have been recycled for their material long after their meaning was forgotten or ignored. A bronze plaque can become raw metal for tools. A silver vessel can be looted. A lead curse tablet can survive only because it is hidden, folded, buried, or thrown into water. Gold may survive because it resists corrosion, yet it may also attract treasure hunters before archaeologists ever see it in place. The most beautiful objects are not always the most informative, especially when their context has been destroyed. Context is the quiet foundation beneath every mark. A symbol on its own may invite endless guesses. The same symbol found in a storeroom, a grave, a harbour, a shrine, or a workshop changes the range of possible meanings. An inscription on a jar found among other jars may suggest contents, ownership, capacity, destination, or administration. A sign on a weapon may point toward maker-owner ritual, dedication, or later marking. A sequence on a funerary object may belong to a name, title, prayer, lineage, or protective formula. Without context, interpretation becomes dangerously free. With context, it becomes disciplined, though not always solved. This is one of the great tragedies of ancient codes. Many were discovered before modern archaeology learned to protect the full story of a find. Objects were pulled from ruins, tombs, fields, and markets with little record of exact location or layer. Collectors prized striking pieces, not soil relationships. Excavators in earlier centuries sometimes moved quickly, focused on monuments rather than fragments, or failed to recognize that small marked objects might be vital. Even today, looting can tear inscriptions from their archaeological setting. A tablet without a proven find spot is not useless, but it is wounded. It can still preserve signs, but it has lost part of the world that might explain them. The surface itself also records human behavior beyond the signs. The depth of a stroke can show pressure. Uneven spacing can suggest haste or inexperience. Corrections may reveal uncertainty. Repeated templates may suggest schooling. A polished surface may show that an object was handled often. A sealed lump of clay may preserve the texture of cloth-cord basketry or a door peg. A tablet may bear fingerprints pressed unintentionally into wet clay, leaving the body of the writer or handler in the archive more literally than the words do. These details do not decipher the code, but they make it human. They remind the scholar that every sign was made in a physical moment under practical conditions, by someone using tools and materials available in a particular world. There are surprising cases where the smallest physical traces matter more than the most impressive designs. A broken edge can reveal whether an inscription continued. A layering of pigment can show whether signs were repainted. Microscopic wear can distinguish an ancient mark from a modern scratch. The direction of a tool can suggest whether writing moved left to right left, top to bottom, or in alternating lines. The order of overlapping strokes can show how a sign was constructed. Even the way a tablet was shaped may imply whether it belonged to a known administrative tradition or to something less familiar. Scholars still debate many such details because material evidence often whispers instead of speaks. The durability of a surface can also mislead. Stone monuments and metal treasures tend to survive visibly, so they can dominate the imagination. But the everyday life of writing may have lived mostly on humble materials: clay tags, wooden boards, wax tablets, folded leaves, strips of leather baskets marked with ink labels tied to goods or walls later plastered over. If such materials vanish, a culture may appear less literate or less organized than it was. The ancient code that remains may seem rare and ceremonial only because ordinary examples decayed. No single explanation fully accounts for the distribution of surviving signs until preservation bias is considered. This matters deeply for an undeciphered system. Decipherment thrives on abundance. A scholar needs repeated words, recurring formulas, variants, errors, long sequences, and different contexts. If the code survives only on a few sealed short labels or fragmentary objects, it may remain forever difficult to prove whether a proposed reading works. Short texts are especially cruel. They may be real writing, but they do not provide enough grammar. A dozen signs can hold a name and title, but they can also hold a commodity list, a ritual phrase, a number, or a maker's mark. The shorter the text, the more possibilities crowd into it. Material also determines scale. A monumental inscription can carry long statements, but it is expensive and public. A seal can travel, but it usually holds limited information. A potsherd can preserve a quick note, but it may be broken from a larger surface. A tablet can hold an account, but only if the culture uses tablets and the tablet survives. A painted wall can display complex imagery and signs, but weather and rebuilding may erase most of it. Every medium encourages certain kinds of messages and discourages others. The code is therefore shaped not only by language and thought, but by the practical question of where a society chooses to place meaning. By the time an ancient object reaches a laboratory or museum, it has already passed through countless filters. The original act of writing is only the first. Use abandonment, destruction, burial, preservation, discovery, collection, excavation, conservation, publication, and interpretation all affect what can be known. A sign may be ancient, but the modern record around it may be recent and imperfect. A photograph may flatten a groove. A drawing may regularize a messy stroke. A damaged surface may invite restoration that later proves uncertain. Responsible scholars return again and again to the object itself when possible, because copies are interpretations even when made with care. The code nobody has broken is therefore not only locked by language, it is locked by material survival. It exists in fragments because matter breaks. It arrives unevenly because some surfaces endure and others disappear. It confuses because objects move from their original settings. It tempts because a clear symbol on a beautiful artifact can seem more complete than it really is. The marks may be sharp, but the world around them may be blurred. Still there is wonder in the fact that anything survives at all. A clay lump pressed by a seal, a stone face cut by a patient hand, a bone marked in careful rhythm, a metal sheet incised before being folded and hidden, each one carries a small defiance of oblivion. The makers did not know the names of the future scholars who would study them. They did not know that their signs might outlive dynasties, languages, rivers, and cities. They made marks for reasons close to their own lives. Time took almost everything else and left the surface. And that surface is where the modern search must begin. Not with fantasy, not with instant translation, but with the humble question of what the object is, where it came from, how it was made, and what has happened to it since. The ancient code survives because matter preserved it. It remains unread because matter preserved too little. Between those two truths lies the fragile path of decipherment, a path built from clay dust, stone shadows, broken edges, corrosion fingerprints, and the stubborn hope that a lost voice may still be hiding in the marks. Every unread code is surrounded by a second silence larger than the first. The signs themselves are silent because their values are unknown, but the archive around them is also broken. It is missing the pieces that would explain where the code was learned, who used it, what language it carried, what kinds of messages it preserved, and how long it remained alive. A single marked object can seem full of promise when it rests under glass, but it is only one survivor from a vanished system. Around it there should have been shelves, rooms, workshops, sealed containers, practice pieces, discarded drafts, labels, copies, mistakes, and ordinary documents too dull to be treasured. Around it there should have been people. Instead, there is often a scatter of fragments and a long field of absence. This is the broken archive, and it is one of the main reasons ancient codes remain unread. Modern decipherment rarely succeeds because a brilliant mind stares long enough at a sign. It succeeds because the evidence becomes dense enough to trap meaning. A long text repeats words. A set of tablets reveals formulas. A bilingual inscription connects unknown signs to a known language. A secure excavation layer fixes time and place. A name appears beside a recognizable image. A number system can be separated from nouns. A title repeats across several objects. Slowly a structure forms. But when the archive is broken, each clue floats too freely. A sign may appear 3 times, but not enough to reveal whether it is a sound, a word, a title, or a ritual marker. A sequence may look patterned, but too short to prove grammar. A symbol may resemble one from another culture, but resemblance without context can mislead. The most famous successes in decipherment create unrealistic expectations, because they make the past look more generous than it usually is. Some scripts became readable, because history accidentally preserved a bridge between languages. A known text stood beside an unknown text. A conquered or multilingual world repeated the same message in different writing systems. A ruler wanted many peoples to understand his authority, and that political need became a gift to future scholars. Yet many ancient codes offer no such bridge. They have no surviving translation beside them, no clear alphabetic descendant, no long royal inscriptions with repeated names, no living language close enough to guide interpretation. The code is not protected by a lock so much as separated from its key by centuries of destruction. Sometimes the missing key may have been very ordinary. It may have been a wooden board covered with writing that rotted in damp soil. It may have been a cloth label tied to goods and thrown away. It may have been a school exercise on a cheap surface never meant to last. It may have been an archive burned too thoroughly, or not burned enough because unfired clay can dissolve back into earth, while baked clay can survive disaster. The accidents of preservation are uneven to the point of cruelty. A destructive fire may save tablets by hardening them, while a peaceful abandonment may allow them to crumble. A collapsed roof may seal a room and protect its contents, while careful cleaning by later inhabitants may remove the very debris archaeologists would need. The archive is also broken by human choices. Later builders quarry old stones, farmers level mounds, tomb robbers remove objects from graves, collectors separate artifacts from their find spots, museums inherit pieces from older excavations whose records are thin. In some cases, the most important information is lost at the moment of discovery, not in antiquity. A marked object pulled from the ground without its layer-associated objects and exact position loses part of its meaning forever. It can still be studied, but it can no longer testify as fully. The sign survives while the circumstances that might explain it are gone. This loss of context can create false confidence. An object in isolation looks complete because the eye sees its edges. A tablet has a front and back. A seal has a design. A plaque has a border. But archaeologically, it may be only a loose page from a library whose shelves burned away. A modern viewer sees the artifact as a whole. The scholar must remember that it may be a fragment of a system. The object may not contain enough information to identify its own purpose. It may have belonged to a series, a set, a ritual, a bureaucracy, or a trade practice that is now invisible. Dating adds another layer of difficulty. A sign system must be placed in time before its development can be understood, yet dating is not always straightforward. An object can be older than the layer where it is found if it was curated, reused, or disturbed. A carved stone can be moved centuries after it was made. A seal can be kept as an heirloom. A pot can be deposited long after manufacture. Radiocarbon dates apply to organic material associated with an object, not necessarily to the act of inscription itself. Stratigraphy can be blurred by digging erosion, burrowing animals, later construction, or old excavation methods. Scholars can often establish broad periods, but the finer sequence remains debated. Without sequence, it becomes harder to know whether signs evolve, spread, decline, or belong to separate traditions. The same problem applies to geography. A marked object found far from its place of manufacture may indicate trade migration, imitation, gift exchange, conquest, or simple reuse. A seal from one region can impress clay in another. A metal object can travel as treasure, loot, offering, or heirloom. A script may appear in a port because merchants use it, not because the local population reads it. A sign on imported pottery may say more about distant production than local speech. What survives in the record suggests contact, but contact is not the same as understanding. A code may move farther than its readers. Language itself can disappear more completely than objects. A script may encode a spoken language with no known relatives or relatives so distant that comparison yields little. Even if the signs could be assigned sounds, the words beneath them might remain obscure. This is a sobering point often missed in popular accounts. Decipherment is not one task, but several. Scholars must identify the sign system, determine how it works, connect signs to sounds or meanings, recognize the language, and then interpret the texts. A script can be partly understood while the language remains poorly known. A language can be guessed while the script remains uncertain. A few names may be recognized without producing true reading. The evidence remains incomplete at several levels at once. Names are among the most tempting clues. They repeat. They can be tied to rulers, places, deities, or images. They sometimes survive across languages. In successful decipherments, royal names and titles have often opened the first cracks in the wall, but names can also mislead. A repeated sequence may not be a name at all. A figure shown beside signs may not be labelled by them. A title can be mistaken for a personal name. A deity's symbol can be read as a ruler. If the surrounding culture is poorly understood, even the most promising clue must be handled carefully. No single explanation fully accounts for the signs, unless it works across many examples, not just one impressive object. Another problem lies in the length of surviving texts. Many unread systems are known mostly from short inscriptions. Shortness is not proof that a system is not writing, but it limits what can be learned. A 2-sign or 5-sign sequence can fit many interpretations. It can be a name number owner's mark maker's signature commodity label ritual abbreviation, clan emblem, or administrative code. Even a few dozen signs may not reveal grammar if the text is formulaic. A long inscription, by contrast, can expose repeated endings, word order, sign frequency, and structural patterns. Without long texts, scholars may see hints of language but lack the leverage to prove it. The broken archive also distorts social interpretation. The surviving objects may come mostly from elite places, because elites built in durable materials and gathered goods worth preserving. If so, the code may appear more restricted than it was. Or the reverse may be true, a few humble marks may survive while royal or ritual texts have disappeared. Archaeologists must avoid assuming that the sample represents the whole society. Preservation chooses strangely. A palace archive can survive because it burned. A village tradition can vanish because it used wood. A sacred inscription can endure because it was carved in stone, while the everyday notes that would explain its vocabulary are gone. There is also the problem of modern categories. Researchers want to know whether a sign system is writing proto-writing notation, emblem ornament, or code. Ancient users may not have divided these things so neatly. A mark can identify, count, protect, decorate, and invoke at the same time. A sign on a ritual object may not behave like a sentence, yet it may still carry fixed meaning. A system used by merchants may encode goods and numbers without recording speech fully. A script used in a sacred context may preserve formulas rather than ordinary language. Scholars still debate these distinctions because the archive rarely offers enough examples to settle them. In the absence of a complete archive, caution becomes a kind of discipline. The responsible scholar learns to say less than the imagination wants. A sign may be probably repeated, possibly related, perhaps numerical, may be directional, likely administrative, but not certainly readable. This language can feel unsatisfying, especially beside the dramatic promise of a lost message. Yet it is the only way to protect the past from being overwritten by modern desire. An undeciphered code invites projection precisely because it cannot easily answer back. The fewer the facts, the more room there is for fantasy. Still, the broken archive is not empty. It gives fragments of a vanished order. A repeated sign at the end of several sequences may suggest a title or grammatical ending. Similar inscriptions on objects of the same type may suggest function. Differences between careful and casual writing may suggest levels of training. Clusters of finds may reveal centers of use. Changes in sign shape may hint at chronology. Even damaged evidence can narrow the field. It may not unlock the code, but it can prevent careless explanations from passing as truth. The tragedy is that the missing pieces may once have existed in abundance. There may have been shelves of records, bags of sealed tokens, bundles of perishable notes, painted labels, training boards, temple lists, merchants' accounts, and inscriptions now ground into dust. The ancient code nobody has broken may not have been rare at all. It may have been familiar, useful, and repeated through the daily life of its society. Time has made it look like a riddle by destroying the ordinary material that would have made it plain. And so the archive remains broken not as a single shattered room, but as a landscape of partial survivals. Here a sign, there a seal, far away a fragment that may belong to the same system, a damaged edge, a lost find spot, a disputed date, a surface that preserved the mark but not the meaning. The modern search moves through this landscape, slowly gathering what can still be gathered, refusing what cannot be proved, and listening for patterns in the ruins of evidence. The code waits in the fragments, but the fragments do not yet form a voice. A code without a key is not merely a set of unknown symbols, it is a system whose basic rules are missing. The signs may be visible, measured, photographed, and arranged in charts, but the first question remains unresolved: what kind of thing is being seen? A mark may represent a sound, it may represent a whole word, it may represent an idea, it may mark a category without being pronounced, it may stand for a number, a commodity, a title, a place, a person, a god, a clan, or a ritual act. It may do several of these things depending on where it appears. The difficulty is not only that scholars do not know the answers, it is that they must determine which questions the ancient system was designed to answer. This is where the puzzle becomes deeper than visual recognition. A modern observer may look at a sign shaped like a fish and assume it means fish. That is a natural impulse, and in some early writing systems it may sometimes be right. But writing quickly escapes simple picture making. A fish shape can come to represent the word for fish, a sound in the word for fish, a name that sounds like fish, a profession connected with fish, an offering category, a deity, a place by water, or a conventional sign whose original image has lost importance. Over time, the sign may become so stylized that the fish is no longer recognized by the people using it. The picture becomes a sign, and the sign becomes part of a system. Without the system, appearance is a dangerous guide. Many successful scripts in history are mixed systems. They do not obey the clean categories that modern learners prefer. A single text may include signs for sounds, signs for whole words, signs that clarify meaning, numerical symbols, and traditional spellings preserved long after pronunciation has changed. A sign may be read one way in a name, another way in a title, and another way in a ritual formula. Some signs may be silent markers that tell the reader what kind of word follows. Others may be abbreviations understood only through scribal habit. No single explanation fully accounts for an unread code unless it can handle this complexity. A proposed decipherment that treats every sign as a simple picture may be too shallow. One that treats every sign as an alphabetic letter may be equally misleading. Alphabetic writing feels natural to many modern readers because it is familiar, but it's not the default form of ancient communication. Alphabets are powerful because they reduce speech to a relatively small set of sound signs, but many early systems used larger and more layered methods. Syllabic systems may represent combinations of consonant and vowel. Logographic systems may use signs for words or morphemes. Administrative systems may focus on numbers and categories rather than full speech. Ritual signs may preserve fixed formulas without recording everyday language. Some sign systems may not be full writing at all, but still carry standardized meaning. Scholars still debate these boundaries because the evidence often allows more than one possibility. The key, if it exists, must explain behavior. Signs do not simply sit, they behave. They appear in certain positions, they repeat with certain neighbors, they cluster on certain objects, they may begin or end sequences, they may vary slightly in ways that suggest scribal style or real difference. They may be separated by lines, boxes, dots, spacing, or changes in direction. A code begins to reveal itself not through one dramatic symbol, but through the habits of many signs across many surfaces. A sign that appears only at the end of inscriptions may be a title-ending marker or closing formula. A cluster that repeats across objects may be a name or common phrase. A sign that appears beside numbers may be a commodity or unit. These are clues, not answers, but they are safer than guessing from shape alone. Direction is one of the first practical problems. Does the text read left to right, right to left, top to bottom, or in alternating lines? Sometimes the answer can be inferred from the orientation of human or animal figures, from crowding near the end of a line, from overlapping strokes, or from comparisons with related systems. Sometimes it remains uncertain. Direction matters because sign order is the backbone of interpretation. Reverse the order, and a repeated sequence may disappear. Misread the beginning as the end, and a possible grammatical pattern becomes nonsense. Even such a basic question can remain unsettled when inscriptions are short, damaged, or irregular. Then comes the problem of variation. Ancient writing is made by hands, not fonts. The same sign can appear slightly different depending on material, tool speed, training region, and period. A carved stone sign may look different from a painted one. A careful official inscription may differ from a scratched note. A sign may simplify over time. A local school may shape it differently. Modern scholars must decide whether two similar marks are variants of one sign or separate signs with different values. This decision affects everything that follows. Count too many variants as separate signs, and the system appears more complex than it is. Merge distinct signs too freely and meaningful differences are erased. Frequency offers another clue, though it too can mislead. In a long enough corpus, certain signs may appear often and others rarely. In alphabetic systems, frequency can sometimes hint at vowels or common consonants. In syllabic or logographic systems, the pattern differs. In administrative texts, numbers and commodity signs may dominate. In royal inscriptions, titles and names may repeat heavily. In ritual texts, fixed formulas may create artificial repetition. A small corpus can distort frequency completely. If only a handful of objects survive, the most common sign in the known sample may not have been common in the living system. It may only be common in the kinds of objects that happen to endure. Numbers can be both helpful and deceptive. Many ancient systems record quantities, and numerical marks often behave differently from linguistic signs. Repeated strokes, dots, circles, or grouped marks may suggest counting. A sign placed after a number may indicate a commodity or unit. If the same numerical system appears with known goods or measures, it can offer a foothold. But numbers alone do not decipher language. They may show that a tablet concerns administration, but not what the words say. A list of quantities without known labels remains a shadow of an economy, not a readable account. Names tempt the decipherer because they can cross linguistic borders. A ruler's name, a city name, or a divine name may appear in different scripts or be associated with images. If identified securely, names can provide sound values or repeated structures. But the risk is high. People see names where they want names to be. A repeated cluster beside a figure may be a title, not a personal name. A symbol above an animal may identify a ritual, not a deity. A sign near a building may mark a place owner, offering, or scene. In an undeciphered code, a name must be proven by pattern, not by hope. It must fit more than one example. It must help explain neighbouring signs rather than float as an isolated guess. The language beneath the script is another locked chamber. A writing system can be understood only partly if the language is unknown. Even if scholars identify that a sign represents a sound, they still need words to compare. If the spoken language has no surviving descendant or known relative, the script may remain difficult even after structural progress. A sequence can be sounded out and still be meaningless. This is why decipherment often depends on both script and language evidence. A known language written in an unknown script is hard. An unknown language written in a known script is hard in a different way. An unknown language written in an unknown script is the deepest difficulty. The code nobody has broken may sit precisely in that difficult space. Its signs suggest order. Its objects suggest use. Its repetition suggests convention. But the language may be lost, the corpus may be small, and the context may be too fragmentary to force a single reading. Scholars can build sign lists, identify possible variants, classify object types, compare neighboring cultures, and test whether the system behaves like writing. They can rule out weak claims. They can narrow possibilities. Yet narrowing is not the same as reading. There is also a subtler danger, a key that almost works. A proposed solution may explain a few signs elegantly, especially on one famous object, but fail when applied to the wider corpus. This is the graveyard of many decipherment claims. A real decipherment must travel. It must read not just the object that inspired it, but other inscriptions as well. It must predict patterns before they are noticed. It must make sense of damaged passages without forcing them. It must survive the discovery of new material. A reading that depends on selecting only convenient examples is not a key. It is a decoration placed over the lock. The ancient code remains without a key because the key is not one thing. It is a convergence. It is the meeting of enough signs, enough context, enough language evidence, enough repeated structure, enough material understanding, and enough restraint. It requires imagination, but imagination held in place by discipline. It requires seeing possibility without falling in love with it too quickly. The evidence remains incomplete, and that incompleteness is not a failure of effort. It is part of the historical condition itself, and so the symbols wait in their rows and fragments. They may not be encrypted by design, yet they are encrypted by loss. They may once have been read quickly by a trained person who saw not mystery but routine meaning. A name, a number, a delivery, a dedication, a prayer, a command, a memory. The modern scholar sees the same marks and must first rebuild the rules that made seeing possible. Until that happens, the code stands as one of the most humbling forms of ancient evidence, a message clear enough to prove that someone meant something, and obscure enough to remind the present that meaning is not preserved by matter alone. The first real signs of order inside an unread code often appear quietly. Not as a sudden translation, not as a triumphant sentence, but as recurrence. A symbol returns, a cluster repeats, a short sequence appears on objects that seem related. A mark stands at the edge of a line more often than chance would suggest. Another sign avoids certain positions as if governed by a rule that can be felt before it can be named. This is where the silence begins to develop texture. The code still does not speak, but it stops looking random. It begins to behave like something made within a shared system. Pattern is the first language of decipherment. Before scholars can know what signs mean, they must know how they are arranged. They count them, classify them, compare them, and watch them move through the surviving material. They ask which signs are common, which are rare, which appear alone, which appear in groups, which never appear together, and which seem to mark beginnings or endings. A single inscription may be too brief to reveal much, but many brief inscriptions can sometimes create a larger rhythm. The evidence remains incomplete, yet repetition can still reveal that the ancient makers followed rules, even when those rules remain unnamed. This process can seem cold from the outside, almost mechanical, but it is one of the closest ways modern researchers come to the lost minds behind the code. A repeated sequence means that someone somewhere has chosen the same arrangement more than once. Perhaps it is a name, perhaps it is a title, perhaps it is an offering formula, a commodity label, a workshop mark, or an administrative category. Whatever it is, it was stable enough to be copied. That stability is precious. It suggests convention, and convention is the beginning of interpretation. The direction of reading often becomes one of the earliest patterns to pursue. On some objects, signs are arranged in straight lines. On others, they curve around a seal, fit into boxes, follow the shape of a vessel, or occupy narrow spaces between images. If animals or human figures are part of the signs, their faces may point toward the beginning of a line, though this is not universal. If signs become cramped at one edge, that edge may mark the end where the writer ran out of space. If strokes overlap, microscopic study may reveal which part was made first. These small details can help determine whether the sequence moves leftward, rightward, downward, or in some alternating pattern. A wrong direction can turn order into confusion, so even this basic discovery matters. Once direction is suspected, researchers can look for structure. They may notice that certain groups recur at the start of inscriptions on seals, while other groups appear near the end of inscriptions on vessels. A possible opening formula may emerge. A possible closing sign may appear. Some marks may behave like dividers separating units of meaning. Others may appear attached to specific object types. If a sign appears mostly on storage jars, it may relate to contents, ownership, capacity, destination, or control. If it appears in burials, it may carry a name title offering protection or status. The surrounding archaeology does not translate the sign, but it narrows the field of responsible thought. Frequency analysis adds another layer. In a large enough body of texts, the number of times each sign appears can be compared. Alphabetic systems tend to show certain patterns. Syllabic systems show others. Logographic and mixed systems behave differently again. A corpus dominated by accounting texts may show heavy repetition of numerical and commodity signs. A corpus dominated by seals may repeat names, offices, or institutional formulas. Yet frequency is a fragile tool when the surviving sample is small. If 10 objects survive, a sign appearing 4 times may look important, but perhaps thousands of missing texts would have changed the picture completely. Scholars still debate how far statistical methods can go when the archive is broken. Computers can help, but they do not remove uncertainty. Databases allow researchers to compare signs across scattered collections, test possible sequences, visualize networks of co-occurrence, and search for patterns too subtle for the eye alone. Imaging can reveal erased or damaged marks. 3-dimensional scans can distinguish a shallow scratch from a deliberate stroke. Statistical models can estimate whether a sign distribution resembles known writing systems more than random decoration. Artificial intelligence can cluster variants, identify recurring structures, and suggest relationships among symbols. But machines do not understand an ancient code simply by processing it. They detect pattern. Meaning still requires language context and human judgment. There is a lesser-known difficulty hidden inside pattern, hunting the problem of deciding what counts as the same sign. Ancient marks are made by different hands on different surfaces. A sign scratched quickly into pottery may look unlike the same sign carved carefully into stone. A seal impression may distort an engraved design because clay shifts under pressure. A damaged mark may preserve only half its original shape. If researchers split variants too strictly, they create a sign list full of false differences. If they merge them too freely, they erase meaningful distinctions. The entire structure of analysis depends on these decisions, and the evidence often refuses to make them easy. Word division can be just as elusive. Modern readers are accustomed to spaces, punctuation, and standardized lines, but many ancient systems do not separate words clearly. Some use dividers but not consistently. Some write continuously. Some arrange signs according to visual balance rather than linguistic units. If a repeated cluster appears, scholars must ask whether it is truly one word, part of a phrase, a name with a title, or 2 separate units that happen to occur together. In a short inscription, even identifying the boundaries of meaning can become uncertain. The code may have grammar, but the grammar is hidden behind a surface where divisions are not obvious. Grammar itself leaves traces, though faint ones. If certain signs regularly appear after many different clusters, they may be endings, particles, determinatives, titles, or category markers. If a sequence changes slightly across repeated inscriptions, the changing part may be a personal name while the stable part is a formula. If signs appear in predictable positions, they may reflect word order. If a symbol precedes several different possible names, it may mark a title, profession, deity, or place. These are the kinds of patterns that allow scholars to move from simple counting towards structural interpretation. Still, no single explanation fully accounts for such patterns unless it works across the entire corpus. Images can help, but only with caution. Many ancient inscriptions appear beside scenes, animals, vessels, human figures, processions, weapons, ships, plants, buildings, or ritual gestures. It is tempting to treat the signs as captions. Sometimes they may be. A figure beside a short sign group might be named by it. A vessel beside repeated marks might identify contents. A ruler in a scene might be accompanied by a title. But images can also be symbolic, decorative, mythic, or formulaic. The signs may not label what is closest to them. They may relate to ownership, dedication, ritual, or authority in ways that are not visually obvious. A picture gives context, not certainty. Archaeological distribution offers another kind of pattern. If signs appear mostly in one city, the system may be local. If they spread across ports and trade routes, they may belong to commerce or elite exchange. If they are found in sanctuaries, ritual use becomes more likely. If they appear in administrative buildings, storage areas, or ceilings, economic control may be central. If they appear across a wide landscape with regional variation, the code may have been adapted by different communities. What survives in the record suggests zones of use, but distribution is shaped by excavation history, preservation, and chance. An absence on the map may mean no ancient use or simply no modern discovery. One of the most valuable patterns is change over time. A living sign system does not remain perfectly still. Signs may simplify, styles may shift, new forms may appear, old ones may disappear. A script may become more standardized under centralized authority or more diverse when power fragments. If researchers can place inscriptions in a secure sequence, they may watch the code evolve. Evolution helps separate early forms from late forms and regional variants from true sign differences. But chronology is often one of the weakest parts of the evidence. A beautiful theory of development can collapse if the dating of a key object changes. The search for patterns also forces scholars to confront coincidence. Human minds are excellent at seeing order, sometimes too excellent. A few repeated marks may feel meaningful even when the sample is too small. A resemblance between signs from distant cultures may seem dramatic, but arise from simple shapes that many people could invent independently. Lines, crosses, circles, boxes, waves, and animal forms are not rare in human mark-making. Similarity is not relationship. Pattern must be tested against context, chronology, and the full range of evidence. This is where many popular claims fail. They leap from visual likeness to historical connection without building the bridge in between. Yet the slow work is not sterile. There is beauty in finding order without forcing speech. A chart of recurring signs can reveal a vanished discipline. A cluster of similar inscriptions can suggest that objects once moved through the same institution. A repeated ending can hint at grammar. A sequence carved with care on different materials can show that the code had standards, teachers, and expectations. Even when the words remain unread, the patterns show that the makers were not merely decorating surfaces, they were participating in a system larger than any single object. This is the stage where the ancient code becomes both more knowable and more frustrating. It is no longer a shapeless mystery. It has sign counts, possible directions, recurring clusters, object associations, regional distributions, and perhaps even suspected formulas. The silence is mapped. The walls of the locked room are measured more precisely, but the door is still closed. A pattern can prove that meaning existed without revealing what the meaning was. It can show grammar without vocabulary order, without translation intelligence, without voice. The code nobody has broken therefore teaches a hard lesson about knowledge. Understanding does not always arrive as a single revelation. Sometimes it accumulates as constraints. Scholars learn what the code is probably not. They learn which readings fail. They learn where the signs cluster, how they vary, and which object carry them. They build a disciplined outline around an empty center. The absence remains, but it is no longer a blank absence. It has shape, and in that shaped silence the ancient makers come slightly closer. Their hands repeat forms because those forms matter. Their institutions preserve sequences because sequences have force. Their objects carry marks not as accidents, but as parts of a shared world. The modern eye cannot yet hear the message, but it can sense the rhythm of a lost language moving beneath the surface like footsteps behind a sealed wall. Every repeated sign is a faint knock from the other side. Every pattern says that the silence is not empty. It is organized waiting and still beyond reach. The more silent an ancient code remains, the more loudly people attempted to speak for it. A surface covered in unread symbols becomes a kind of open space, and open spaces invite occupation. Into that silence come confident claims, dramatic translations, secret histories, lost continents, vanished, prophets impossible, voyages, cosmic messages and connections drawn across oceans and millennia by little more than resemblance. The unread code becomes a mirror, and the mirror is dangerous because it reflects the desires of the present more easily than the realities of the past. This temptation is not new. Since the first great rediscoveries of ancient inscriptions, scholars, collectors, mystics, nationalists, adventurers, and enthusiastic amateurs have tried to recover lost meanings. Some worked carefully and made real contributions. Others built castles from sand. The boundary between curiosity and fantasy is not always obvious at the beginning, because every decipherment begins with imagination. Someone must be willing to suspect that a repeated sign matters. Someone must compare, test, and propose, but imagination becomes unreliable when it stops submitting to evidence. A theory that cannot fail is not a decipherment. It is a belief system wearing the clothing of research. False doors often open with visual similarity. One sign looks like a symbol from another culture. A shape resembles a letter in a known alphabet. A mark appears to match a religious emblem, a star, a boat, a mountain, or a sacred animal. From there, a story grows quickly. Perhaps the two cultures were connected. Perhaps one inherited knowledge from the other. Perhaps an ancient migration carried the script across continents. Perhaps the code proves a forgotten empire existed. The problem is that simple shapes are not rare. Crosses, circles, ladders, waves, triangles, spirals, eyes, hands, birds, snakes, and boats appear in many human traditions because they arise from common experiences, common tools, and common ways of simplifying the world. Resemblance is a clue only when supported by chronology, geography, material culture, and repeated structural evidence. Without those, it is only resemblance. Another false door opens through selective reading. A proposed decipherment may choose a few signs that seem to match a preferred language while ignoring the rest. It may translate one famous object in a way that sounds impressive, but fail when applied to other inscriptions. It may treat damaged marks as whatever the theory requires. It may rearrange sign order, merge different signs, split similar signs, or assume missing vowels and meanings until the result becomes flexible enough to produce almost anything. This is especially dangerous because a flexible method can appear successful to non-specialists. If a system can be made to say many things, it may look powerful. In truth, it explains nothing. A real decipherment does the opposite. It becomes less flexible as it improves. It makes specific predictions. It explains inconvenient examples, not only attractive ones. It works across the corpus, including dull fragments and damaged texts. It accounts for sign, frequency, sequence, context, and variation. It does not depend on one spectacular artifact, while ignoring dozens of smaller ones. It allows other scholars to test the reading and reach similar results. It may begin with a bold insight, but it survives by discipline. The evidence remains incomplete in many cases, yet even incomplete evidence can expose a theory that bends too easily. Popular theories often thrive because they offer what careful scholarship cannot: certainty, drama, and a complete story. An undeciphered code is frustrating. It forces honest uncertainty. It may allow scholars to say only that a sign system is likely administrative, possibly linguistic, probably tied to a particular region and still not readable. That kind of answer can feel unsatisfying beside a claim that the code reveals the origin of civilization, a hidden map of the world, or a lost science older than history. The human mind prefers a door that opens even if it opens into a painted wall. There is also an emotional reason these theories endure. Ancient codes touch identity. They seem to promise origins, ancestors, sacred knowledge, or proof that one group was older, wiser, more widespread, or more important than others admit. In some cases, decipherment claims become entangled with nationalism or cultural pride. A script may be claimed as evidence that a modern people descends directly from a glorious ancient civilization, or that a region possessed writing before its neighbours, or that a famous culture borrowed everything from a less recognized one. Some of these questions can be studied responsibly, but the danger comes when the desired conclusion arrives before the evidence. Then the code is no longer being read, it is being recruited. Fringe theories also flourish in the gaps left by looting and poor context. An object with no secure find spot can be placed into almost any story. A symbol separated from its archaeological layer can be dated too early, too late, or connected to the wrong culture. A forged or altered object can enter discussion and poison the evidence if accepted too quickly. Even genuine artifacts can be misread when removed from their surroundings. This is why context is not a technical detail. It is a defense against fantasy. Without it, the past becomes too easy to rearrange. Forgery is a particularly troubling false door. The market for mysterious antiquities rewards objects that look ancient, strange, and important. A forged inscription can be made to satisfy modern expectations of mystery. It may combine signs from known scripts, invent exotic forms, or imitate famous objects. Some forgeries are crude. Others are skillful enough to require scientific testing, close paleographic study and comparison with secure examples. A single convincing forgery can waste years of attention. It can also create patterns that never existed in antiquity. Scholars must therefore ask not only what a sign means, but whether the marked object belongs honestly to the ancient world at all. Even when there is no fraud, modern handling can distort interpretation. Early drawings may regularize signs that were actually irregular. Photographs taken under poor lighting may hide shallow marks or exaggerate scratches. Museum restorations may join fragments incorrectly. A damaged object may be completed in the imagination before it is completed by evidence. Digital tools can sharpen images, but sharpening can also create false edges if used carelessly. The code is already difficult enough without adding modern shadows to ancient ones. There is a quieter false door as well, the assumption that every mark must contain profound meaning. Some ancient signs may be routine, practical, or limited. A short inscription may not preserve a myth or secret doctrine. It may say something as ordinary as a name, a quantity, a destination, or an ownership mark. This does not make it unimportant. Ordinary records are among the most valuable windows into ancient life, but the desire for grandeur can lead interpreters away from the most plausible explanations. A code nobody has broken may guard a lost epic, but it may also guard a warehouse account. History is often more interesting when it's allowed to be ordinary. At the same time, excessive skepticism can become its own trap. Not every bold proposal is foolish. Many accepted decipherments once sounded uncertain. Progress requires hypotheses, and outsiders have sometimes noticed patterns professionals missed. The difference lies in testing. A useful hypothesis invites correction. It becomes stronger when challenged. It changes when new evidence appears. It does not protect itself by accusing all critics of blindness or conspiracy. Scholars still debate many undeciphered systems because debate is part of the work, not proof, that all interpretations are equally valid. Some readings are better supported than others. Some are possible but unproven. Some are simply unsupported. The responsible path moves between gullibility and refusal. It recognizes that ancient people were capable of complexity without imagining them as possessors of impossible secrets. It respects mystery without exploiting it. It allows uncertainty to remain where the evidence demands uncertainty. It treats popular fascination not as an enemy, but as something that must be guided away from easy answers. The past does not become less wondrous when false claims are removed. It often becomes more wondrous because the real evidence is stranger, subtler, and more human than the fantasies built over it. Consider the silence of the code itself. It does not ask to be turned into a prophecy or a map of vanished continents. It asks if it asks anything to be understood on the terms of the people who made it. Those terms may be administrative, ritual, economic, political, personal, or some mixture scholars have not yet fully imagined. The signs belong first to their own landscape, their own materials, their own institutions, their own spoken language, and their own historical pressures. To tear them from that world in order to make them serve a modern story is another kind of loss. The false doors are seductive because they seem to offer escape from silence, but most lead away from the locked room rather than into it. They replace the difficult work of decipherment with a performance of revelation. They turn fragmentary evidence into certainty and uncertainty into conspiracy. They forget that not knowing is sometimes the most honest form of knowledge available. No single explanation fully accounts for an unread code until it can stand in the full light of evidence, including the dull, broken, inconvenient pieces that do not flatter the theory. And so the ancient code remains surrounded by claims, some careful, some careless, some sincere, some opportunistic. Around its real silence gathers a noise made by the living. The task is to listen past that noise without losing the original wonder. The marks are still there. They still carry the pressure of a vanished hand. They still hint at a system of meaning that once needed no modern rescue. They do not become less powerful because they refuse easy translation. In fact, their resistance is part of their power. They remind the present that the past cannot simply be possessed by wanting it badly enough. It must be approached slowly with patience, humility, and the willingness to leave a door closed until the right key is truly found. Behind every unread code there is a world that made it necessary. The signs do not rise from emptiness. They belong to hands, tools, walls, paths. Animals, rivers, harvests, ceremonies, fears, ambitions, and ordinary acts repeated so often that nobody thought to explain them for the future. A mark on clay may look isolated in a museum case, but in its own time it belongs to a room, and the room belongs to a settlement, and the settlement belongs to a landscape of fields, roads, shrines, workshops, burial grounds, and distant contacts. To understand the code, scholars must widen the lens until the symbols are no longer floating shapes, but traces of a society trying to organize its world. This is where archaeology becomes the language around the language. Even when the signs cannot be read, the ground can speak in other ways. A settlement plan may reveal streets, courtyards, storage areas, defensive walls, elite residences, or craft districts. Pottery can suggest cooking habits, trade storage, and changing tastes. Animal bones can show diet, herding, feasting sacrifice, or environmental stress. Seeds and pollen can reveal crops, wild plants, climate, and land use. Burials can show status, belief, disease, violence, kinship, and contact with distant regions. Tools can reveal industries. Imported objects can trace exchange networks. None of this translates the symbols directly, but it reconstructs the world in which the symbols had meaning. If the code appears mostly on ceilings, storeroom tags, jars, weights, or tablets, the society behind it may have depended on organized movement of goods. That does not mean it was cold or mechanical. Administration is human drama reduced to marks. It means grain is gathered from fields, oil is pressed from olives or seeds, wool is counted, animals are allocated, labor is assigned, and households negotiate their place within a larger system. Someone must decide what is owed and what is received. Someone must trust fear, resist, or obey the record. A sign on a jar may carry the quiet weight of a harvest season, a family's obligation, or a temple's demand. The unread code may therefore preserve not only information but hierarchy. If the signs appear in tombs or sacred places, another world opens. The marks may have protected the dead, named the buried invoked offerings, identified deities, marked ritual objects, or fixed social rank beyond death. A code in a burial chamber may not function like a warehouse account. It may belong to a boundary between the living and the dead, where signs help order memory, status, and fear. Yet even this must be handled carefully. A mark found in a grave is not automatically religious. Objects move into burials for many reasons: personal possession, inherited prestige, trade, value, symbolic power, or practical identity. Scholars still debate these meanings because ancient ritual rarely explains itself in terms modern observers can easily separate. If the signs appear on portable objects, especially seals, ornaments, vessels, or small tablets, movement becomes part of the story. A portable inscription can travel with a person, a shipment, a merchant, a marriage alliance, a diplomatic gift, a migrant group, a priest, or a raiding party. It may mark ownership, identity, authority, or origin. It may cross borders without carrying widespread literacy. A seal from one culture can be admired by another that cannot read it. A foreign script can become a prestige object. An imported jar can preserve a mark from far away, while the local community only cares about the contents. What survives in the record suggests contact, but contact has many forms and not all of them include understanding. The environment around the code matters as much as the society. Many early complex communities grow near rivers, coasts, fertile plains, trade corridors, or resource zones where people and goods gather. Water makes fields productive, but it also brings floods, silt, disease, and shifting channels. Mountains offer minerals and timber, but they complicate movement. Deserts can isolate settlements, yet also preserve remains that wetter lands destroy. Coastlines invite exchange and danger. A script may flourish where administration is needed to manage surplus, where trade creates repeated transactions, or where political authority must stretch across distance. But the same landscape can turn against the system that depends on it. Drought, salinization, flood change, deforestation, erosion, and shifting trade routes can all weaken the institutions that support writing. This is one reason ancient codes become unread. They are tied to worlds that are more fragile than their monuments suggest. A palace wall may look permanent, a sealed design may seem confident, a carved sign may appear to declare order. But the order beneath it depends on harvests, labour, trust, ritual, legitimacy, and routes of exchange. If those networks fail, the signs can outlive the system they once served. A code may remain on durable objects after the fields dry, the storehouses empty, the harbour silts, or the ruling family disappears. The material record preserves the declaration of control more easily than the slow unravelling of control itself. The society behind the symbols may not have been a single unified civilization in the way later storytelling prefers. It may have been a network of towns, competing elites, related communities, trading partners, or ritual centres, sharing signs without sharing a single political identity. Modern labels can simplify what was once messy. Archaeologists may name a culture after a site pottery-style region or artifact type, but ancient people may have understood themselves through kin language, occupation, god-ruler, valley, island, or city. The code may cross these boundaries unevenly. Some communities may use it regularly. Others may imitate it. Others may encounter it only through trade goods. No single explanation fully accounts for the social map unless the signs are studied alongside settlement economy and material culture. A lesser-known detail in the study of ancient writing is how often power hides in small administrative debris. Monumental inscriptions attract attention, but humble ceilings and tags can reveal the machinery of daily control. A lump of clay pressed around a cord may preserve the closure of a storeroom door. A broken ceiling may show that goods were accessed. A repeated seal impression may identify an official office or workshop. The back of a ceiling may carry impressions of cloth-reed wood or basketry, preserving the texture of objects long vanished. These tiny traces can reconstruct bureaucracy without a single readable sentence. They show a world of containers, locks, deliveries, and supervision. The code may also reveal specialization even before it reveals meaning. If signs are carefully standardized, someone taught them. If they appear on weights, measures, or accounting objects, someone needed precision. If they are paired with elite imagery, someone used them to perform authority. If they occur across long distances with consistent forms, a shared convention travelled with people or institutions. If they vary regionally, local traditions may have adapted the system. Each possibility points toward a different social world. The unread signs become less mute when placed within patterns of labour and exchange. Trade can be especially revealing because it leaves mixed evidence. A settlement may contain local pottery beside imported stone shells, metals, beads, or pigments. Isotopic and material studies can show that objects moved across great distances. A code found near such goods may be connected to merchants, administrators, or elite gift exchange. Yet trade does not automatically explain writing. Many societies trade without scripts. Others write internally but conduct exchange orally. Still, where repeated marks appear on goods that move the possibility of labels, ownership marks, or transaction records become stronger. The signs may be the shadow of trust between strangers. Ritual power is another possible layer. In many ancient societies, administration and religion are not separate worlds. A temple may collect grain, employ workers, sponsor crafts, store offerings, and legitimize rulers. A sign on a sacred vessel may record dedication, ownership, contents, or divine association all at once. A priestly class may preserve specialized knowledge that appears secret to outsiders, but ordinary within the institution. If such a system collapses, the signs can become especially difficult to interpret because their meaning depends on practices that leave partial traces. A repeated formula may look administrative while carrying ritual force. A sacred symbol may also function as an institutional mark. The human world behind the code is therefore layered. There are elites who commission or control signs, specialists who make them workers, whose goods are recorded traders, who move objects, ritual authorities who give marks sacred weight, and ordinary people who may see the signs without reading them. There are children learning which marks matter, elders remembering older forms, outsiders copying designs they do not understand, and later generations inheriting objects whose meanings have begun to fade. The code exists within these relationships. It is not only a technical system, it is a social behavior, and yet caution remains necessary. Archaeology can reconstruct context, but it cannot fill every silence. A rich settlement does not prove a script records trade. A tomb inscription does not prove a prayer. A repeated sign does not prove a king. The evidence remains incomplete, and responsible interpretation must keep possibility separate from certainty. Still, the surrounding world can make some possibilities more likely than others. It can prevent the code from becoming a blank screen for fantasy. It can return the signs to soil tools, bodies, and institutions. The ancient code nobody has broken begins to look different when seen this way. It is no longer only a row of shapes waiting for translation. It is the visible edge of an entire, vanished arrangement of life. The signs belong to a society that needed memory beyond speech authority, beyond presence and meaning fixed to matter. They point toward people managing surplus, honoring the dead, marking identity, claiming power, conducting exchange, or protecting ritual order. Their exact words remain hidden, but their world presses around them. Perhaps that is why the code still holds attention even before it can be read. It offers the promise of thought, but also the evidence of life. It stands where human systems become complex enough to leave messages and fragile enough to lose them. It is a trace of a society that once believed its marks would work because the world around them understood how they worked. Now the world is gone, and the marks remain surrounded by pottery ash bones, walls, seeds, tools, and silence. The symbols do not yet speak, but the earth around them murmurs. Together they reveal that the lost code is not merely an intellectual riddle. It is the fossil of a human order pressed into matter at the moment before memory began to break. A code becomes most powerful when it is not only read but guarded. The signs may begin as practical tools shaped by trade, storage, ritual, or identity, yet over time they can gather a weight that exceeds their immediate function. They become instruments of access. They determine who may open a storeroom, who may confirm an offering, who may speak for a god, who may claim descent, who may command labor, and who may preserve a ruler's name after the ruler's body has turned to dust. In this deeper layer, the ancient code nobody has broken is not merely a lost language. It may be a map of power, who held it, who was excluded from it, and how a society made authority visible. In many ancient communities, power does not always appear as a crown or a weapon. It appears as control over memory. A ruler can force obedience for a moment, but a record can extend that obedience into the future. A priest can perform a ritual in front of witnesses, but a marked object can preserve the fact that the ritual occurred. A merchant can swear that goods were delivered, but a sealed tag can stand as proof after the caravan has moved on. A household can claim status through speech, but an inscribed object can make that claim durable. The sign becomes a small, hard piece of social reality. It does not simply describe power. It helps power operate. This is why writing and restricted knowledge often grow close together. A script may not be secret in the modern sense, but if only a small group can use it, it functions as a controlled resource. The trained reader occupies a privileged position between authority and the rest of society. The scribe, priest, official, or seal owner does not need to be the highest person in the hierarchy to be essential. They translate command into record, ritual into formula, goods into numbers, and memory into objects. Their skill allows institutions to see farther than ordinary human attention can reach. A palace can count stores in rooms the ruler never enters. A temple can track offerings from people the priest may never personally know. A trade network can recognize a seal impression far from the hand that made it, yet power hidden in signs can be quiet enough to miss. A clay ceiling is small. A mark on a jar is unimpressive beside a monument. A tablet of accounts may appear dull compared with a carved statue. But these modest objects may have touched more lives than grand inscriptions did. They helped organize food, labor, tribute, ownership, and movement. They decided whether a door had been opened, whether a vessel belonged to one authority or another, whether goods were counted correctly, whether a name entered the record or disappeared from it. The code's meaning may be lost, but its placement on such objects hints at a system where marks carried consequences. Ritual gives another form of force. In a sacred setting, signs can do more than communicate information. They can participate in an act. A symbol placed on a vessel, amulet, figurine, wall, tablet, or funerary object may help define the object's role within a ceremony. It may name a deity, identify an offering mark, purity protect the dead, curse an enemy, dedicate a gift, or seal a boundary between ordinary and sacred space. Scholars still debate many such uses because ritual meaning rarely survives in simple, readable form, especially when the script itself is unknown. But archaeology often shows that signs are placed carefully, not casually, on objects whose contexts suggest more than routine administration. This is where secrecy becomes difficult to define. A ritual sign may be visible to many people and still be understood by few. An ordinary worshipper may see a priest handle an inscribed object without knowing every sign upon it. A family may place a marked item in a grave because tradition says it is proper, even if the exact formula belongs to specialists. A ruler may display signs publicly on stone, while the full reading remains accessible only to trained elites. Public display and restricted understanding can coexist. A code can be seen by all and understood by almost none. Its visibility may even strengthen its authority, because unreadable signs can feel older, higher, and more official than ordinary speech. There is a strange human tendency to respect marks that appear sanctioned by power. Even today, a stamp, seal, signature, emblem, or official form can change behavior before anyone studies it closely. In the ancient world, this effect may have been stronger where literacy was limited and institutions wrapped signs in ceremony. A seal impression could carry the presence of an official. A carved inscription could make a ruler's claim part of the landscape. A sacred formula could transform an object's status. The sign becomes a performance of order. It tells people that a decision has been fixed, that a boundary has been marked, that a gift has been received, that a person has been named, or that a power beyond ordinary life has been invoked. The code may also preserve hierarchy through what it omits. Written systems often record the concerns of those who control writing. They may preserve lists of goods, titles of officials, names of rulers, dedications by elites, or rituals sponsored by institutions. They may say little about the people who farmed the fields, carried the jars, cut the stone, fired the pottery, buried the dead, or cleaned the rooms where records were kept. Even when the signs are eventually deciphered, the first voices recovered may not be the whole society, but the voice of its organized power. What survives in the record suggests not only what people thought, but what some people considered worth making durable. For an undeciphered code, this imbalance is harder to detect because the words cannot yet correct or complicate the archaeological picture. A sign on an elite object may seem to belong only to elites, but ordinary uses may have vanished. A mark in a storeroom may seem administrative, but the goods may have ritual value. A short inscription on a personal ornament may suggest ownership, but it may also indicate status, lineage, or protective power. No single explanation fully accounts for these signs until their contexts are studied together. Still, the possibility of restricted knowledge remains central. A code used by specialists can become a wall inside a culture long before it becomes a wall between the ancient world and the modern one. Control over writing can also shape history itself. Events that enter written memory may survive in official form, while events left unwritten become archaeologically faint. A king who commissions inscriptions may appear more prominent than communities that left fewer durable records. A temple that preserves offerings may seem central because its debris survives. A merchant network that marks goods may become visible, while oral agreements leave little trace. The code does not merely reflect the past, it filters the past. It chooses through human institutions and material survival which parts of life are likely to reach the future. This filtering can make ancient authority look more stable than it was. Records often present order because they are tools of order. A list of deliveries does not show the arguments behind the deliveries. A seal does not show the fear of the person whose goods are sealed. A title does not show whether the office was respected, resented, or ignored. A ritual inscription does not show whether everyone believed in its power. The surface may preserve the official version of reality. Beneath it may lie negotiation, resistance, exhaustion, and quiet refusal. Archaeology sometimes catches these tensions in directly abandoned buildings, hoarded goods, violent destruction layers, hurried repairs, uneven diets, or changes in burial practice. The code, if read one day, may reveal more, but it may also remain the voice of those who had the authority to write. Power can make a script conservative. When signs are tied to ritual law or elite identity, changing them may feel dangerous. Old forms may persist because they carry ancestral weight. A script may remain difficult because difficulty itself protects status. If only trained specialists can master the system, their position is secure. If ancient signs are believed to hold sacred force, copying them correctly becomes an act of discipline. This does not mean the script was invented to exclude, but exclusion can become one of its effects. Complexity, tradition, and authority reinforce one another. At times, writing may even outlive the spoken conditions that created it, because power favors continuity. A ritual formula may be copied long after its language has shifted. An official title may preserve an archaic sign. A sacred name may remain unchanged while ordinary speech evolves around it. This creates layered scripts where old and new meanings coexist. For later decipherers, such conservatism is both useful and difficult. Repeated formulas help reveal structure, but archaic spellings and specialized meanings can obscure how the system relates to living language. Scholars still debate such problems even in scripts that are partly understood. In unread systems, the difficulty deepens. The possibility of secrecy also gives the code a particular atmosphere. It may not have been secret from enemies alone. It may have been controlled within the society itself. A merchant's mark protects a transaction from confusion. A priestly sign protects ritual knowledge from misuse. A ruler's inscription projects legitimacy. A seal restricts access. A funerary formula guards the dead. Each use places meaning behind a threshold. The threshold may be practical, sacred, political, or social. The modern unreadability of the code is the last and widest threshold created by time after all the earlier thresholds have collapsed, and yet the signs should not be reduced to domination. They may also have created trust, continuity, beauty, and belonging. A shared script can connect distant settlements. A seal can protect goods from theft. A ritual sign can comfort the living. A name on an object can preserve identity. A record can prevent disputes as well as enforce obligations. Power in ancient societies is rarely one thing. It can shelter and exploit, organize and exclude, remember and erase. The code carries that complexity even before it can be translated. The ancient code nobody has broken therefore stands in the half-light between communication and control. It suggests a society where certain marks mattered because institutions made them matter. It points to specialists whose knowledge gave them access to rooms, rituals, goods, and memories closed to others. It hints at rulers, priests, merchants, and households, using signs to make claims last longer than speech. But it also hints at ordinary people moving through a world shaped by marks they may not fully understand, just as modern people now stand before the same marks and feel the old distance from the other side. The code remains silent, but its silence is not empty. It is filled with the weight of hands that sealed doors, counted grain, dedicated gifts, named the dead, marked boundaries, and preserved authority in matter. The signs once helped decide what was official, sacred, owned, owed, remembered, or forbidden. Their meanings have vanished, but their power has left a shadow. To study them is to approach not only a lost language, but a lost architecture of trust and control, where knowledge moved through narrow channels, and the future was expected to understand what only a few people may have known in the first place. When a civilization stops speaking through its old signs, the silence rarely begins all at once. It begins in small failures of continuity. A school closes and does not reopen. A temple loses its income. A palace archive burns, and the people who knew how to rebuild its records scatter. A trade route shifts, making old labels less useful. A ruler dies, and the next ruler prefers another language of command. A generation grows up hearing new words in the marketplace. The signs remain for a while, still visible on wall seals, vessels, tablets, tools, or tombs, but the living system around them thins. The code enters its long afterlife, not yet forgotten, not fully alive, suspended between use and relic. Collapse is often imagined as a single catastrophe. A city in flames, a gate, broken people fleeing into smoke, a palace floor covered in fallen beams. Such moments do happen, and archaeology sometimes preserves them with unsettling clarity. A room is burned so intensely that clay hardens. A storage jar lies smashed where it fell. A skeleton remains in a doorway. A seal impression survives because the destruction that ended its world accidentally saved it. But many collapses are slower. They unfold through drought, economic strain, political fragmentation, disease, migration, soil, exhaustion, warfare, shifting rivers, or the gradual loss of trust in institutions. No single explanation fully accounts for every ancient ending, and scholars still debate the balance of climate conflict, internal weakness, and outside pressure in many cases. For a script, the exact form of collapse matters. If a city burns but the administrative class survives elsewhere, the writing tradition may continue. If a dynasty falls but the scribes are useful to the new rulers, the signs may be adapted. If a region is conquered by people who value the old records, the script may be preserved, translated, or absorbed into a new system. But if the institutions that train readers disappear, The script can die even while people remain on the land. Biological survival and cultural continuity are not the same thing. A population may endure while its older code becomes unreadable within a few generations. This is one of the most haunting forms of loss. The descendants of a culture may live among the marks of their ancestors and still lose access to them. They may keep old stories, rituals, place names, foods, tools, or memories, yet no longer read the script that once recorded official life. Later, people may reuse inscribed stones as building material, wear old seals as ornaments, place ancient objects in new graves, or treat marked fragments as charms. They may recognize age without knowing meaning. They may sense authority without translation. The signs do not vanish from the world. They vanish from understanding. When writing dies, it can leave behind strange misunderstandings. A sign once used for an office may become a decorative motif. A sacred inscription may be copied for its appearance rather than its words. A ruler's name may be remembered as the name of a god, a giant, a founder, or a cursed king. Old monuments may be folded into new myths. Stones with unread signs can become boundary markers, talismans, or sources of local legend. The evidence remains incomplete, but history shows again and again that people are capable of preserving fragments of the past, while transforming their meanings beyond recognition. The end of a script may also be hidden by the survival of another script. A region can remain literate while one particular code disappears. New writing does not always continue old memory, it can replace it. A later administration may keep records in a conquering language. A religious movement may spread a new script for sacred texts. Merchants may adopt a simpler or more widely understood writing system. Over time, the older code becomes unnecessary. It may survive in inscriptions that are admired but no longer produced. It may linger in ceremonial formulas after everyday use ends. Eventually, even those formulas become impossible to read. The replacement of one writing system by another can be practical, but it can also be political. To impose a script is to reshape memory. A new ruler who controls records controls taxes, land titles, and history. A new religious authority may define which texts are worth copying and which are not. A new elite may favor a language that links them to wider networks of power. The old script may not be violently suppressed, it may simply be starved of use. In historical terms, neglect can be as destructive as fire. A sign system not copied is a sign system moving toward death. The fragility of writing becomes especially clear in periods of social stress. Food shortages can reduce the surplus needed to support specialists. Warfare can destroy schools and archives. Migration can scatter communities before apprentices complete training. Long-distance trade collapse can remove the practical need for certain records. Environmental change can push people away from old centers of authority. As settlements shrink or reorganize, the value of complex administration may decline. People may continue to count, mark, remember, and negotiate, but they may do so with simpler tools or oral systems. The old code, once essential to a larger structure, becomes too heavy for the new world to carry, and yet the physical signs may become more permanent precisely at the moment their meaning is dying. A palace fire may harden tablets. A sealed tomb may protect inscribed objects. A collapsed wall may bury a carved stone. A drought may drive people away and leave their stored goods undisturbed. Disaster can be a conservator. What is tragic for the living can be generous to archaeology. This gives the archaeological record its eerie character. The moments that preserve the clearest evidence are often moments of interruption, abandonment, or destruction. The code survives because life failed around it. The people who experience such changes do not necessarily think of themselves as living through the end of a script. They think of hunger taxes, fear, debt opportunity, old loyalties, new rulers, safer roads, failing wells, broken walls, or children needing food. A writing system can be lost through decisions that seem small and reasonable at the time. A family leaves a town. A craftsman stops marking goods for a vanished office. A priest no longer trains a successor. A merchant adopts a different seal because customers recognize it more easily. A child grows up without learning the old signs because nobody sees the use. The chain breaks not with a single blow, but with many ordinary choices under pressure. This is why unread codes are so closely tied to the fate of civilizations. They show that complexity is not the same as permanence. A society may build roads, temples, harbours, archives, palaces, workshops, and systems of record, yet the meaning of its signs can still disappear if the living networks collapse. The marks may be durable, but literacy is not. It depends on bodies, teaching institutions, and repeated need. Clay and stone can survive where schools cannot. The collapse of speech around a script also changes how later history is written. Once a code becomes unreadable, the society that made it may be known mostly through archaeology and through the writings of outsiders, if any exist. Outsiders may misunderstand, simplify, mock fear, or mythologize what they see. They may record names incorrectly or describe customs through their own assumptions. Without the society's own readable records, its internal view becomes faint. The people remain present in houses, graves, tools, food remains and art, but their own formal words stay locked. What survives in the record suggests a life far richer than the readable evidence can confirm. Modern scholars therefore face a double challenge. They must reconstruct the collapse that silenced the code, and they must avoid letting the collapse define the people entirely. A civilization is not only its ending. An unread script is not only a failure to be deciphered. It once belonged to a living present full of routines, ambitions, jokes, frustrations, ceremonies, and small acts of care. The moment of silence is powerful because it interrupts something that had been alive. To study the end of a script is also to imagine the long period when it was not mysterious at all. Some signs may have gone through stages of partial memory. At first many could read them, then only specialists, then only a few elders or ritual keepers. Then nobody could read them, but people still knew they mattered. Then they became ornaments, ruins, curiosities, or stones with strange marks. Finally, they entered the modern world as an archaeological problem. This slow fading is difficult to prove in any one case, but it offers a useful way to understand how living meaning becomes ancient mystery. Silence has a history. It accumulates. There is a deep humility in recognizing this. The unread code is not silent because ancient people failed to communicate. They communicated successfully within their world. They made signs that worked for their needs, their institutions, their gods, their rulers, their goods, and their dead. The failure belongs to continuity, not intelligence. Time severed the agreement between mark and reader. The world that gave the signs meaning was not preserved with the signs themselves. And so when civilization stops speaking through their old codes, the silence that follows is not empty. It is crowded with lost schools, abandoned storerooms, broken routes, changed languages, burned rooms, reused stones, and children who learned other ways to remember. The ancient symbols remain like lights from a house whose inhabitants have gone. They prove that someone was once inside. They reveal that order, memory, and authority once moved through those marks. But the door has closed and the language of the house has faded into the walls. The modern search for an ancient code begins far from the room where the signs were first made. It begins under laboratory lights, in excavation records, in museum storage, in digital archives, in photographs taken from angles no ancient eye could have imagined, and in databases that gather scattered fragments into one field of comparison. The code remains old, but the tools brought against it are increasingly new. Scholars now examine surfaces at microscopic scale, scan inscriptions in 3 dimensions, compare thousands of sign forms across collections, and ask machines to notice patterns too faint or too repetitive for human patience alone. The silence is ancient. The listening has become modern. This shift has changed the study of unread scripts in important ways. Earlier generations often relied on hand copies, drawings, squeezes, casts, and printed sign lists. Many of these were made with great care, but every copy interprets what it copies. A line may be sharpened, a damaged curve may be completed, a shallow scratch may be ignored, or an accidental mark may be treated as deliberate. Once an error enters a published drawing, it can shape discussion for decades. Today, high-resolution photography and digital imaging allow researchers to return more closely to the object itself. A sign can be studied under raking light, infrared, ultraviolet reflectance, transformation imaging, or 3-dimensional modeling. Marks once thought lost beneath corrosion, soot, mineral deposits, or wear may become visible again. This does not mean technology performs miracles. A blurred sign may remain blurred. A damaged edge may still remove the crucial mark. A surface may be too worn to decide whether a stroke was intentional. But modern imaging can sometimes reduce uncertainty. It can show that 2 signs once thought different are actually the same form distorted by damage. It can reveal that a supposed inscription is a modern scratch. It can expose erased marks, corrections, underdrawings, or repeated tool movements. It can help determine the order in which strokes were made, suggesting direction and scribal practice. These are not translations, but they are the groundwork from which responsible translation must eventually grow. Databases have transformed another part of the work comparison. An undeciphered code may survive in objects scattered across many countries, museums, excavation reports, private collections, and old publications. Before digital catalogues, it was easy for a scholar to know one group of inscriptions well, and miss a pattern visible only when distant pieces were placed side by side. Now researchers can assemble sign corpora, tag variants, record object type material, find spot date direction, and associated imagery. They can search for repeated sequences across hundreds of fragments. They can test whether a sign appears mostly on seals, tablets, pottery, metal objects, or monuments. They can watch the code as a whole rather than as a series of isolated curiosities. Statistical methods add a colder but useful form of discipline. A sign system can be analyzed for frequency order entropy, clustering positional preference, and network relationships between signs. These methods cannot declare meaning, but they can help evaluate whether the system behaves more like writing notation, decoration, or random marking. If certain signs occur in predictable positions, if sequences show internal structure, if sign distribution resembles known linguistic systems more than arbitrary patterns, the case for writing becomes stronger. If the signs lack such structure, other explanations may become more plausible. Scholars still debate the limits of these methods, especially when the surviving corpus is small, but they have made the silence more measurable. Artificial intelligence enters this landscape with both promise and risk. Machine learning can classify sign shapes, identify possible variants, compare damaged forms, detect recurring clusters, and model likely missing signs in broken sequences. It can search vast image sets for parallels and help build cleaner corpora. It may suggest that 2 marks long treated separately are actually one sign, or that a rare sign appears in more places than previously recognized. In some cases, computational tools can reveal patterns that invite fresh human interpretation. But artificial intelligence is not an oracle. It learns from the data it is given, and ancient data is often incomplete, biased, damaged, unevenly published, and shaped by human classification decisions. A machine can amplify errors as easily as insights. The danger is that modern technology can create a new kind of false confidence. A result looks impressive when expressed as a chart probability model or cluster map. It feels objective because it comes through computation. Yet every model rests on assumptions which marks count as signs, which variants are merged, which objects are genuine, which dates are accepted, which damaged strokes are restored, which corpus is included, and which comparison systems are chosen. If those assumptions are weak, the result may be polished but unstable. The evidence remains incomplete, and no algorithm can supply a missing bilingual text, a lost language, or a destroyed school of scribes. Still, the contribution is real. Modern machines are especially good at patience. They do not tire of counting sign pairs. They do not overlook a repeated cluster because it appears in a dull fragment. They can compare shapes across thousands of images without the same fatigue that affects human observers. They can help scholars test whether a proposed reading produces consistent patterns. They can make old hypotheses more vulnerable to verification or collapse. In this sense, technology does not replace careful scholarship. It sharpens the tools of doubt. Scientific analysis of materials adds another dimension. Clay can be studied to identify sources, firing conditions, and manufacturing methods. Stone can be traced to quarries. Metals can reveal alloy composition, corrosion history, and sometimes patterns of trade or recycling. Pigments can show techniques, repainting, or later alteration. Organic residues may suggest contents of marked vessels. Use-wear analysis can show whether an object was handled, displayed, sealed, buried, or carried. These studies do not read signs directly, but they reconstruct the object's life. If a marked tablet was made locally, the code may belong to that community. If the material came from faraway exchange or movement enters the interpretation. If a seal was used repeatedly, its marks carried continuing authority. If an object was made only for burial, its signs may belong to funerary practice. One lesser-known but powerful modern approach is the study of negative evidence on sealings. When a seal is pressed into clay attached to a container, door bundle, or document, the back of the clay may preserve impressions of the material it sealed: cord, textile, wood grain, basketry, papyrus, leather, or reed. Even if the signs on the front remain unread, the back can reveal the administrative world in which the seal functioned. A tiny clay lump can show that goods were tied, rooms were closed, packages were controlled, or documents were secured. The code remains silent, but its use becomes clearer. Meaning is approached from the other side. Excavation has also become more attentive to the small and fragmentary. Earlier archaeology often favoured monumental remains and visually striking objects. Modern fieldwork is more likely to recover tiny ceilings, broken tablets, marked sherds, production debris, and environmental samples. It records precise locations, layers, associations, and depositional histories. This matters enormously for undeciphered codes because a fragment without context may drift among too many interpretations. A fragment found in a storeroom floor, in a tomb, fill in a workshop drain, or in a destruction layer speaks differently. The soil around the object becomes part of the text. Yet even modern fieldwork cannot undo older losses. Many important objects were discovered before careful recording or pass through markets before scholarly study. Some remain in private collections where access is limited. Some are known only from old photographs. Others may be forgeries or altered pieces whose authenticity is difficult to establish. Digital tools can connect what is available, but they cannot recover context once destroyed. This is one of the moral dimensions of ancient codes. Looting does not simply move objects. It tears away information that might have helped give ancient voices back their words. The dream of a sudden breakthrough still remains. Somewhere perhaps there may be a bilingual inscription buried under a collapsed wall, a longer archive sealed beneath a floor, a school tablet with sign lists, a merchant's record in 2 scripts, or a monument repeating known names in unknown signs. Such discoveries have changed history before. They may do so again. But the honest search does not depend entirely on miracle. It advances by building better corpora-cleaner images, firmer dates, stronger context, and more cautious models. It moves the code from mystery towards structure even if full reading remains distant. Modern machines also change how scholars collaborate. An inscription found in one country can be photographed, modelled, and compared with material across the world. Specialists in linguistics, archaeology, computer science materials, science, art, history, anthropology, and conservation can work on the same object from different angles. A sign once studied by a single expert can become part of a shared digital environment. This can reduce isolation, but it can also create disagreement because more eyes bring more interpretations. Debate remains necessary. The code is not solved by consensus alone, but consensus can help separate promising evidence from attractive illusion. In the end, the greatest modern insight may be a humbling one: pattern is not meaning, and data is not understanding. A computer may identify structure where none was previously seen, but the ancient mind behind the structure remains beyond the machine's direct reach. A scan may reveal every stroke but not the spoken word attached to it. A database may show that a sequence repeats 20 times, but not whether it names a ruler, a god, a commodity, or a dead person. The distance has narrowed, yet it has not disappeared. The ancient code nobody has broken now stands between 2 forms of intelligence. On one side is the vanished intelligence of its makers, who arrange signs according to rules their world understood. On the other side is the modern intelligence of researchers and machines trying to rediscover those rules from fragments. The meeting is not equal. The ancient makers had the living language, the institutions, the teachers, and the purpose. The modern world has instruments, computation, and hindsight. Each side possesses what the other lacks. Between them lies the silence. Still the work continues because every improvement matters. A clearer image may correct a sign list. A new excavation may add a longer sequence. A statistical study may reveal that a supposed decoration behaves like structured notation. A material analysis may return an object to its proper region. A machine may notice a recurring pattern that sends a scholar back to the archive with new eyes. None of these alone breaks the code. Together they tighten the circle around it, and perhaps that is the true character of modern decipherment. It is not always the dramatic turning of a key, it is the patient removal of darkness from the edges of a locked door. The symbols remain unread, but they are less alone than they once were. They are surrounded now by scans, measurements, maps, databases, models, and careful uncertainty. The ancient silence has not yielded, but it has been listened to with unprecedented attention. Somewhere inside the marks, if enough of the world around them can be rebuilt, the first fragile syllable of meaning may still be waiting. If the ancient code were broken, the first change would be quieter than most people imagine. There would be no instant resurrection of an entire civilization, no sudden flood of perfect answers, no complete return of every vanished voice. Decipherment rarely works that way. It begins with signs becoming less strange. A repeated cluster becomes a name. A mark beside numbers becomes a measure. A formula begins to separate into parts. A title appears where only a pattern stood before. The silence does not shatter all at once, it thins, and through that thinning a lost world begins to acquire edges sharp enough to recognize. The first readable words might be ordinary. That is often the most likely and in its own way the most moving possibility. The code may record deliveries fields, grain animals, vessels, seals, officials' offerings, workers' debts, or names attached to property. It may not begin with kings speaking across eternity. It may begin with administration. A jar belongs to someone. A shipment goes somewhere. A person receives rations. A ritual object is dedicated. A boundary is confirmed. A dead person is named. Such details may seem modest beside the drama of mystery, but they are exactly the kinds of details that turn ruins into lived places. They restore the texture of daily systems, the machinery by which people ate, worked, worshipped, traded, and obeyed. Names would matter deeply. A deciphered code could reveal personal names, titles, offices, gods, places, lineages, rulers, workshops, or institutions previously hidden behind anonymous objects. Names are not small things in archaeology. They connect artifacts to social life. They allow sequences of power to be traced. They show which offices existed, which deities were honoured, which families or groups held status, which settlements had importance, and perhaps which languages shaped identity. A name written on a seal or tablet can transform an object from a type into a trace of a person. The person remains distant but no longer entirely faceless. Place names could alter maps. A settlement known only by a modern archaeological label might recover its ancient name. A river harbour district shrine field or border could be identified. Trade routes might become more precise if goods are labelled with origins or destinations. A sign repeated across distant objects might reveal a shared centre, a political network, a sacred site, or a merchant route. What now looks like a scattered distribution of mysterious marks could become a geography of movement. The code might show that certain communities were more connected than the material record alone suggests, or less connected than popular theories claim. Either result would matter. A broken code could also clarify the society's structure. Titles might reveal ranks of officials, priests, merchants, craft specialists, military roles, or household heads. Administrative text could show how goods were collected and redistributed. Funerary inscriptions could show how status continued after death. Legal or boundary texts, if they existed, could reveal property systems or conflict resolution. Ritual formulas could expose relationships between human authority and sacred power. Even a small group of readable texts might show whether the script belonged mostly to palaces, temples, trade families, or more varied social settings. Scholars still debate these possibilities because the evidence remains incomplete, but decipherment could shift the debate from broad inference toward named institutions. Language would be perhaps the greatest prize and also one of the most difficult to interpret. If the signs encoded a known or related language, the decipherment might connect the society to a broader linguistic family migration history or cultural network. If the language proved isolated, it might reveal a lost branch of human speech with no clear descendants. Either outcome could reshape understanding of population movement, contact, and identity. But caution would remain essential. Language is not the same as ethnicity, and script is not the same as people. A community can adopt a script from neighbours, use a prestige language for administration, or write one language while speaking others in daily life. Decipherment would open doors, not erase complexity. The code might also change the timeline of ideas. If texts include calendars, astronomical observations, measurements, ritual cycles, myths, medical practices, laws, or technical instructions, they could reveal how the society understood order in the world. But even here restraint is necessary. Popular imagination often expects ancient unread texts to contain astonishing secrets. Most ancient documents, when read, turn out to be a mixture of the practical, the formal, the sacred, and the repetitive. That is not disappointing. It is historically rich. A list of rations can reveal labor organization. A dedication can reveal belief. A legal formula can reveal conflict. A school exercise can reveal education. A mistake can reveal a student. There is particular intimacy in mistakes. If the code were broken, scholars might begin to identify scribal errors, corrections, unusual spellings, regional variants, hurried hands, or apprentice practice. These details would bring back not just institutions but human imperfection. A trained scribe may skip a sign. A student may copy a form awkwardly. A local tradition may spell a title differently. A seal cutter may compress signs to fit a small space. The ancient world becomes less like a frozen monument and more like a working society full of skill, habit, pressure, and occasional confusion. What survives in the record suggests order, but decipherment may reveal the small frictions inside that order. If ritual texts emerge, the consequences could be profound. They might identify deities now known only from images, clarify offerings, reveal funerary hopes, name sacred places, or explain objects whose purpose remains debated. A symbol on a vessel might become part of a dedication. A mark in a tomb might become a protective formula. A repeated sign on an amulet might reveal a divine name, yet the recovery would still be partial. Religious language can be formulaic, metaphorical, conservative, and difficult even when readable. A deciphered sacred text may raise new questions as quickly as it answers old ones. No single explanation fully accounts for ancient belief from text alone. Ritual action, material context, and landscape would still matter. Historical events might also emerge, though perhaps unevenly. Royal inscriptions, if present, could name rulers, victories, construction projects, alliances, offerings, or genealogies. Administrative archives could reveal periods of stress through changes in production, rationing, storage, or movement of goods. Letters, if any survived, could show diplomacy, complaint command, or negotiation. Such discoveries could transform a culture from a mute archaeological horizon into a participant in written history. But official texts must be read critically. Rulers exaggerate. Institutions present order. Ritual formulas repeat ideals. The recovered voice would be precious but not automatically transparent. One of the most important changes would be the correction of modern stories. A broken code could confirm some cautious hypotheses and destroy others. It might show that a sign system was not a full script after all but a specialized notation. It might prove that a supposed foreign connection was only visual coincidence. It might reveal that the language was unexpected, the chronology different, the function narrower, or the society more complex than assumed. Decipherment is not merely the gaining of information. It is also the removal of false certainty. The past becomes clearer partly because certain attractive mistakes can no longer survive. There would be consequences beyond scholarship. Museums would rewrite labels, textbooks would change, public imagination would shift. A culture known mostly through its unread signs might regain names and internal categories. Descendant or neighbouring communities might find new ways to understand regional heritage, though such connections would need care and respect rather than simplistic claims. The code's decipherment could become a cultural event because writing carries emotional force. It feels like hearing someone speak after a very long absence. Even if the first words are ordinary, the act of reading them would be extraordinary. Still, breaking the code would not end mystery. It would create better mysteries. Once signs can be read, scholars begin asking more precise questions. Why does this title appear only in one region? Why do certain formulas change over time? Why are some names foreign? Why are women visible in one kind of record and absent in another? Why does a deity's name appear in trade contexts? Why do administrative texts stop in one layer? Why does a script change shape before disappearing? Decipherment does not close the past. It opens it to deeper argument. The ancient code nobody has broken therefore holds a promise that is both grand and humble. It may not reveal a lost science or a hidden prophecy. It may reveal something more valuable, the structure of a human world on its own terms. It may give back names, places, offices, goods, offerings, anxieties, rules and habits. It may show how people organized memory before memory failed. It may restore the everyday intelligence of a society that has been reduced too long to beautiful objects and mute symbols. And if the code remains unread, even that possibility changes how the signs are seen. Each mark becomes a sealed container of potential history. A small cluster may hide a person's name. A repeated ending may preserve grammar from a dead language. A sign beside a number may belong to an economy of fields and storerooms. A mark in a tomb may carry grief. The unread surface is not empty simply because it cannot be translated. It is crowded with possible lives. That is why decipherment matters. It is not just the satisfaction of solving a puzzle. It is an ethical act of attention toward people who cannot explain themselves. To read an ancient code is to restore, however partially, the relationship between mark and world. It allows the past to resist being only what modern observers imagine. It gives the dead a chance to be specific. Until that day, the code remains poised between silence and speech, holding within its signs the possibility that an entire lost order may one day become not fully known but newly audible. The last unread message is not always the grandest one. It may not be carved across a palace wall or fixed to a monument meant to dominate a valley. It may be a small fragment broken from a larger object and found among dust ash stones and ordinary debris. It may carry only a few signs. It may have been made by a tired hand at the edge of a working day. It may have named a person whose life left no other trace, counted goods that were eaten long ago, sealed a door that opened once and was never closed again, or marked an offering placed before a power whose name has vanished with the language that invoked it. Yet because it cannot be read, it gathers a strange gravity. It stands for all the messages that reach the present without bringing their voices with them. By this point, the ancient code has become more than a puzzle. It has become a record of broken continuity. The marks show that a society learned to make memory durable, but they also show that durability is not the same as survival. Clay can harden, stone can endure, metal can resist decay. A seal can leave its impression after the hand that pressed it has disappeared into the earth. But meaning needs a living chain. It needs teachers, readers, institutions, speech habit and need. When that chain breaks, the most carefully made sign becomes a survivor without a translator. The object crosses time, the language does not. This is what gives the last unread message its power. It sits at the meeting point of human confidence and historical fragility. The maker believed, perhaps without thinking about it, that the mark belonged to a world where such marks made sense. A scribe did not pause before every sign and wonder whether people thousands of years later would understand it. A seal owner did not press clay for the benefit of distant scholars. A potter did not scratch a mark into a vessel in order to create a mystery. These acts were practical, formal, sacred, or routine. They were meant for people nearby, for offices, households, gods, buyers, heirs, officials, or the dead. Their meaning was local before it became ancient, and yet that local meaning now carries universal force. An unread sign reminds the present that every civilization is made of agreements. People agree that a mark stands for a sound, that a seal stands for authority, that a title stands for office, that a name stands for a person, that a boundary stands where the record says it stands. These agreements feel solid while a society lives inside them. They organize fields, marriages, rituals, taxes, trade, inheritance, punishment, and memory. But agreements can dissolve, languages change, rulers fall, schools close, sacred places are abandoned, the mark remains and the agreement vanishes. There is a quiet warning here, though not the kind that needs to be exaggerated. The ancient world is not a simple mirror of the modern one, and history does not repeat in neat circles. But the unread code shows that complexity can fail in unexpected ways. A society may possess skilled specialists, organized institutions, far-reaching trade, rich symbolic life, and durable materials, yet still lose the continuity that makes its records readable. What survives in the record suggests intelligence and order, but the evidence also shows how easily those things can become archaeological residue. No single explanation fully accounts for such loss, because collapse is rarely one force. It is weather and politics, hunger and migration, violence and adaptation, choice and accident all working through human lives. The last unread message also asks for humility in the face of evidence. The desire to solve is natural. It is part of what makes the code compelling. A person sees repeated signs and wants the lock to open. A scholar notices a pattern and wants it to hold. A viewer imagines the hidden words behind a surface and hopes they contain something astonishing. But not every mystery yields because it is interesting. Some remain because the needed evidence is gone. Some may wait for a future discovery. Some may never be broken at all. The past is not obligated to become fully available. That uncertainty does not make the search meaningless. On the contrary, it gives the search its dignity. Even when the code resists decipherment, the work around it restores parts of the vanished world. Material studies identify claystone pigments and metal. Excavations reveal buildings, burials, tools, food remains, and trade connections. Statistical analysis maps signs without pretending to know every word. Careful scholarship removes false claims and protects the code from being turned into fantasy. Each step narrows the darkness. Each honest limit keeps the past from being overwritten by modern desire. There is also a kind of respect in leaving some things unresolved. An unread code does not have to be filled with invented meaning to matter. Its silence is itself historical evidence. It tells of a society that had systems strong enough to produce signs and vulnerable enough to lose their readers. It tells of specialists whose training ended archives that broke languages that shifted and objects that outlived the minds that once explained them. It tells of how much of human life depends on transmission from one generation to the next. When transmission fails, memory does not always disappear completely. Sometimes it remains as form without voice. The last unread message may one day be read. A new excavation may uncover the missing bridge. A longer inscription may appear from a sealed layer. A bilingual text may lie beneath an unexcavated floor. A forgotten museum object may preserve the pattern that clarifies the system. A machine may detect a structure that sends scholars back to the signs with better questions. History has changed before because one object survived in the right place with the right companions. The possibility remains real even if it cannot be promised. If that day comes, the first reading may be small. A name, a title, a number, a dedication, a place. A word that sounds ordinary until one remembers how long it waited. The moment would not erase every uncertainty, but it would alter the silence. The code would no longer be only a wall. It would become a doorway, narrow, perhaps damaged perhaps, but open enough for a lost society to become more specific. The people behind the signs would still be gone, but one part of their agreement with the world would live again. Until then, the message remains unread, and perhaps that is why it continues to hold the imagination. It is close enough to human thought to feel intimate and distant enough to feel unreachable. It is not a natural formation or a random stain. It is a deliberate act left by a mind. Someone chose the sign. Someone shaped the surface. Someone trusted that the mark would do its work. The mark has done one kind of work very well. It has survived. It has crossed the years. It has carried evidence of intention beyond the fall of institutions and the fading of speech. But the deeper work is unfinished. Meaning waits inside the form. The final unread code stands like a lamp in a ruined room, still present after the people have gone, still holding the shape of a life around it, still unable to say what was placed there to say. Around it lie the broken archive, the vanished scribes, the lost key, the false doors, the patterns in silence, the world behind symbols, and the power that once moved through marks. All of them gather into one last image, a surface touched by an ancient hand, clear beneath modern light, unreadable and alive with absence. The signs remain where time has left them, pressed into clay, cut into stone, carried on fragments, whose edges no longer remember the whole. Around them the world grows quiet. The old rooms are gone. The voices that once made the marks ordinary have faded beyond recovery. No footsteps return to the archive. No teacher corrects the apprentice's hand. No official waits for the seal to be pressed. No family stands beside the marked vessel and understands exactly what has been named, counted, promised, or offered. Only the surface remains, and the surface is enough to hold the imagination. It shows that someone once trusted a mark to carry meaning farther than breath. It shows that memory can be made visible but never completely safe. A civilization may shape its thoughts into matter, yet meaning still depends on living minds. When those minds are gone, even the strongest material becomes strangely fragile. Stone endures, but reading does not. Clay survives, but the agreement between sign and sound can disappear like smoke above an abandoned roof. There is no need to force the code to speak before it is ready. Its silence has its own truth. It tells of broken chains, lost schools, vanished offices, forgotten rituals and languages that once moved easily through human mouths. It tells of patience, of careful study, of the humility required when the past refuses to become simple. Some mysteries may open with new evidence. Others may remain closed, not because they are empty, but because too much of the key has been carried away by time. And still the marks are not dead. They continue to do a quieter work. They remind the present that every age leaves messages it assumes will be understood. They remind every civilization that memory is a living practice, not only a durable object. They keep the lost world from vanishing completely even while withholding its full voice. So the last image is a small one, a fragment under soft light, its signs clear, its meaning hidden, its maker unknown. Dust rests in the cuts. Shadows gather along the broken edge. Somewhere behind those marks is a person, a room, a purpose, a moment. The code does not open. It only waits calm and unread, holding the shape of a vanished thought in the long silence of time.